All right, we are live. Hey, everybody! Friday night. It is a Pontificators night, and we have 5 people along with myself. I guess that's 6 people, and we are going to talk at great lengths about some news that just broke today, just maybe a couple hours ago. That Mr. Dan DiDio has been let go of or fired from DC Comics. So we have Durakin in the chat. We or in the stream here. We have Chester. We have the young lad known as Zach Bradley, and we have Todd Mulrooney, and we had Albino Thunderbuns, but he booked it, man. He couldn't handle the heat. So how you guys been?
Well,
good. It's my ankle.
oh,
It hurts.
oh.
What a sissy.
Your
you gotta
icon
do better than that, man.
You want to know what I was doing for the last 2.5 weeks?
Hell
Not
yeah,
really.
we do.
Yeah.
I was on a grand jury on a murder trial.
Oh, really?
Oh, you were sequestered, huh?
Yes.
Guilty.
So, if you ever get to do this, go in with this one thought. TV is nothing like what really happens. You're so in the dark. You know, you think, right? Say this is just a scenario. The killer killed the deceased with a sword. So they're going to bring in the sword. And the sword is going to touch your hands. You're going to pass it to the jury box. You're going to feel it. You're going to touch it. You're going to look at how sharp it is. That never actually happens. And you really have that idea from TV that all these things that get admitted as far as evidence and what's the other word they use for them, exhibits and stuff, you don't touch them until you get into that room, and then now you're 12 angry men in a room making these decisions. You can touch all that stuff you want.
Todd so wanted to touch the smoking gun.
He wanted
didn't
to touch it. He did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Touch it.
But that's how I thought it. Like, all these pictures are being shown, and I'm going, why are you seeing something I'm not? Why are you? I'm not looking at anything. I don't get to see anything.
So let's cut to the chase. Was he guilty?
Yes, he got life.
Oh, he was.
Oh,
guilty.
dang.
Oh, Todd.
Oh
Todd,
my
you'll
gosh.
have to wear that burden for the rest of your life, Todd. But I'm hoping, Todd, that the free food is true. You got free food, right?
We were bought pastries and coffee every morning, and that was over $100 every morning. Then when you are sequestered, when you deliberate, you're given free food. They take care of you then.
Oh, okay. So how long did it take to deliberate? I've heard that it can take hours.
It took us 2 days.
2 days.
Somebody wanted 2 free lunches, basically.
And you're like, I want to get back to the drawing board, people. I have stuff to
Right.
do.
Right.
Yeah.
If I don't, I will say this. There was one guy who I thought was going to keep us doing this for days and never going to break. And somehow he eventually broke. And that's why I say I think maybe he just wanted to get his 2 meals or whatever. I don't know.
So he held you guys hostage for free food.
On the second day, right? We had a half a day on the first day to deliberate, and then we went home, no decision yet. The second day, the very first vote we took was 8-4, and then it was 10-2, and then we went to lunch and we came back. It was 11-1, and then within an hour it was 12-0. So
Wow.
It did happen pretty fast, but I didn't see it coming. I just thought, I know this guy's not going to break.
How soon did it take you to figure out that he was guilty?
We were very lucky in this
No,
case.
you personally.
No, we were very lucky that there was a video.
Of him
And
doing
a
it?
microphone.
What?
There was a microphone and a video. Now you can't,
Then why did it take 2 days to deliberate?
because a lot of people couldn't hear her say the person's name.
They wanted the food.
A lot of people she says his name 3 times, And then you got some people who go, well, there's 100 Pedros in the world. Yeah, but not 100 that wanted to kill her. There was one. So it took a little bit,
Okay. Well, anybody else want to try to top Todd's story there?
Nope. I stayed home pretty much and worked.
Yeah, I kept my nose clean too. No murder trials for me. All right. I don't know if Joe Albino Thunderbuns is ready to come back in. I see him kind of struggling with things. Should we take a chance with him, you guys?
Yeah. Sure. Of course, you can have everybody a one-on. Who is he though? Is he an artist or one of your DC friends or something?
He edits mostly for like Comicsgate books, and I think his big claim to fame is Flying Fortress, the Eric Weathers.
Oh.
Yeah. And so he's got some new properties that he wants to bring into Comicsgate and publish as well. So
awesome.
Yeah, and I've been doing a lot of live streams with him lately, and he's a good he's got knowledge. He's got good insight on things. So yeah, so what we were going to talk about is we're going to go over Dan DiDio. We'll find out what everybody thinks of him first and foremost, and then we can go into if this is a good thing or a bad thing, and then we're going to get into some of the 5G universe stuff, which is DC's new plan to save their publishing division. So this is a brief little write-up from Bleeding Cool, and it says a number of sources inside and outside DC Comics that Dan DiDio is gone. Rumor has it that this happened from high up at Warner Brothers and was a result of high staff turnover at DC of late, issues with editorial and publishing plans, and Dan being fingered as the man responsible. Okay. So apparently he's the fall guy here. There has to be a sacrificial lamb, right? And so it looks like Dan's the guy.
Well, he's the boss, so.
Well, doesn't he share that position with Jim Lee? Yeah, I'm glad you thought that was interesting. How do you fire one without the other,
right? They put Jim Lee in the corner, brother.
He's exempt from all?
Well, no, they put him in the corner. I mean, what is he going to do?
Yeah. Draw us pretty pictures, make us money. You're not allowed to say anything.
Shut up, be pretty and shut up. Man. That's pretty much what they did to Jim. Yeah.
Yeah, because so you guys are in agreement. Gosh, this is going to be a quick pontificators. So we're all in agreement that Jim probably didn't lose his job because he's valuable to the company in other regards, right?
Mm-hmm.
He also owns part of the company, doesn't he?
No. I also don't think his ideas have been the bad ones.
Say Cornelius.
Here we go. Now we're getting into the thick of things because I'm kind of like a tester. I'm like, let's hear Todd. Let's see what Todd has to say.
If you're gonna say, well, he made those damn costumes that nobody wanted to draw, okay, I agree with that. But I don't think his ideas for what, we're gonna try doing this with Superman or that with Batman or whatever, are the bad ones.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what ideas would those be? If you had, this is a courtroom, Todd. You have to defend Jim Lee. What would be the pluses?
I think his ideas serve the consumer, whereas I believe what I'm getting is Dan was always trying to, almost serve a small minority, and
serving
not,
himself.
Let's do this or let's do that. And granted, when you have an idea, and we're all looking at it like, well, that's a fucking stupid idea, right? But when you have an idea and it's like, okay, we're gonna take Superman, we're gonna age him, and his son will be the new Superman. Well, I can see where you have passion for that, but if you have a Superman, you don't need another Superman. John should have been maybe different than his father, maybe somewhat lesser because he's half human, right? So maybe he's not as strong, but then he's his own character, and flesh him out and give him some story and put him in danger and give him some stakes, and then maybe there's a book there. But you don't have to replace Superman with a younger version of somebody who isn't him and think that that's what people want.
Well, you're talking about Super Sons?
No. I'm talking about the whole 5G idea.
Okay. Well, let's not get into 5G yet.
No. I'm not. I don't mean to, but okay. I'm just saying, that's sort of where I believe Dan has gone wrong, as he's killed a lot of things that were popular.
Young Justice. Screw him for that.
Right, and I don't agree with his sort of his ways. It's like I don't.
But what if you had to? Okay, we already know your Dan DiDio position, but how would you defend Jim Lee then? Like, why would he be less of the offensive one?
Because I've never heard Jim Lee's ideas be the type that didn't.
There you go. There you go. That leads me into my take, and I don't know if this is where Chester was going to go, but I want to hear what Chester, because he was kind of getting into this. So, what was your insight on that, Chester?
Well, I mean, Dan DiDio, he's kind of what the right hand giveth, the left hand taketh, right? You can't take away the good things he's done, because he has done good things, right? Right. He obviously has skill at doing that job. The problem with Dan DiDio is he has an ideology that he perceives that comics need to run by. For one, comic book characters should not be in relationships. There should be no children in comic books, etc., etc., etc. And of course, we don't agree with these things. Particularly one of the projects you were on, Super Sons, was super popular, and they killed that, right? And you have the direct insight into that. But he's done many things like this. He is responsible for Bendis, right? Yeah, he is responsible.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's where I'm going to go. But I'm gonna let you finish, and then I'm gonna throw my 2 cents in this. But go ahead.
Yeah, well, and of course you know more about this than any of us because you were there. But Dan DiDio is a real conundrum for me because he's done some really good things that I appreciate, but then he's done things I can't stand. Right, so the way I stand on Dan DiDio is it's good. He should go. Because he's just spinning in circles and he's not doing the right thing. Because the reason why I think it's a good thing he's going is my answer to your question about Jim Lee. The one thing about Jim Lee is obviously he's been put in a corner. We can see this most directly when they did that debacle that was a live stream of them trying to, look, we're the cool kids now, right? And doing their live stream. What did they do with Jim Lee? They literally put him in the far corner, making sure he was not even on camera, right? And the reason why I have no trouble with Jim Lee is because he has always been for the fans. Always. That dude puts out weekly, bi-weekly art streams. He's sitting there talking to the fans all the time, interacting with them. He's also deeply involved in the MMO world. Jim Lee has always been about the fans, where Dan DiDio has been about his ideology and those who support his ideology. He's a bit tyrannical, I would say. It seems this way. And that would be my general opening salvo into what Dan DiDio is.
Well, let me ask you then, if Dan and Jim share a position, then why is Dan the one that is being slammed more so than Jim Lee?
Because I don't think they share a position at all. I think that is just an honorary title given to Jim Lee. At least that's how it's perceived from us. We don't know the inner workings of Warner Brothers, of course, but we don't perceive Jim as being in charge of anything at all, right? If he is in charge, then he's just playing that silent partner thing. I guess my answer would be that the same thing I said. He is a guy who supports the fans and he wants comics to be for the consumer. Where Dan DiDio wants to adjust our thinking on what we should want as a consumer. And of course, we see this constantly going on across the board with all these things we call the SJW, right? Because they're constantly telling us what we must consume. And Dan DiDio is part of that. And Jim is not.
Like, do you mean position as in like reference to an argument, or position as in reference to a job?
they share the same
Title.
They're co
Yeah.
publishers.
Chief,
Well, I mean, like,
editor
if you
in
meant
chief, editor in chief.
if
Yeah.
they shared the same stance on a certain argument, why is Jim Lee not getting the same?
Because I don't think he really
Same
ever
sort of
has.
backlash.
I don't think he ever really has.
Yeah, and that's the thing
it-
is I don't know any of Jim Lee's positions with regards to any of the decisions that DC has made over the last few years. Whereas DiDio, I know pretty much all of his positions with all the stupid things that I disagree with.
And look, people are naming writers, and you guys have already named Bendis. Now, you can't sit here and say, well, Bendis never wrote a good story, because he had.
I swear to God, Todd, if you defend Bendis, oh my God.
No. I'm going to tell you.
I will send Booster your way, I swear.
Look,
I swear.
King, Fraction, they've all written good books. What you're hoping is that they can find that magic again. Bendis, his magic died at Marvel, and he didn't find it here at DC. And he did some things counterintuitive to what anyone would want. And this line of books with the Wonder Twins and all that nonsense, horrid.
Yeah.
So yes, you want to let somebody who once had magic try to do it again, right? And then now, to me, he's already run his course at DC, and I would think it's time for Bendis to go. But King and Fraction, they're still. Matt Fraction hasn't written that many bad books. I love Matt Fraction. Tom King, he's straight off, but he's written some good. But Tom King's still a young writer in the sense of productive work. So I wouldn't give up on King. His direction of what he did, you may not have liked, but it wasn't far out.
Yeah, but
let's try to keep it focused on the DiDio, because we'll get into like the universe stuff later. But I kind of wanted to see what everybody thought about what's going on with the DiDio and his firing. So we haven't heard from Albino Thunderbun. So Joe, what do you have to say about this?
Well, I think that there's been a creative an editorial power struggle going on there for a long time. I mean, I've heard different people on different channels talk about this. I see it all over Twitter that basically, to try and sum things up for the last 10 years real quickly, essentially it seemed like there was this ideological difference between Geoff Johns and people who believed that, like Johns, the DC universe was all about and should be all about aspirational heroes that people can look up to and want to be like or be with, and that kids can look at and really see themselves growing up one day to be Superman or Batman or what have you. And then other people within DC that I would say would be more along the DiDio ideology, people who would say that no, that all that stuff is old-fashioned and people can't understand the continuity, and we've got to reboot it, we've got to redo it, and we need to make it, we got to bring it up to be relevant to the times, and we've got to deconstruct all of these heroes and make them cool and edgy and gritty and dark. And it just seems like with the New 52, that was DiDio wanting to relaunch everything, but even though it was initially very popular and the sales numbers reflect that, the sales numbers tapered off before long, and they went into a downward slide. They couldn't sustain it. So then Johns comes in and spearheads the rebirth effort and tries to kind of reset the DC universe to be reflective of what it had been prior to the New 52. And I think people often don't understand that behind this creative and editorial power struggle between those two guys, there are people at Warner Brothers, the parent company of DC. And there are some people at Warner's backing Johns, there's some people backing DiDio. And so who's moving in or moving out or moving to the side when things like the Justice League film bombs or Birds of Prey bombs? more recently, when Johns was chief creative officer, but he was also working on the films, and then Justice League bombs. Diane Nelson took the hit for that. Johns took the hit for that. Well, there was people at Warner Brothers behind those moves. And so I think now with the 5G initiative getting such a bad initial reaction from fans and in some cases from media, which has been a little surprising to me, I think that the writing is on the wall that people either at Warner's or now at AT&T, because AT&T is involved. So whoever was running things from the WB perspective, overseeing DC, they now have an AT&T minder, for lack of a better word.
Overlord.
I guarantee there's an AT&T exec who was put in charge of putting Warner Brothers to rights. And part of that was moving people out who were at Warner Brothers overseeing DC, moving them out, and then moving people in to put DC to rights. And there's somebody, whether it's AT&T or Warner Brothers or both, that is behind this move of getting DiDio out of the director's chair, so to speak, of DC Creative. And whether it's going to be Jim Lee as a temporary caretaker, or if it's somebody, let's say, I could even conceivably see Jim Lee as quote unquote the new Stan Lee, where, Stan had that chairman emeritus position and he was essentially an ambassador for Marvel and for comics in general. It wouldn't surprise me if Jim Lee was offered something like that, where he was the face of DC and the face of comics to the normie world, especially with film and TV and all of that. And you might have somebody like Geoff Johns still working in film and TV on behalf of WB, DC, AT&T, however you want to organize.
Yeah, I would argue Jim Lee is already that dude.
Yeah, I think he's been serving in that role, and to me it makes logical sense to simply solidify it, and then whoever has the actual publisher authority, they would be making creative decisions while Jim Lee is out at cons and showing up at red carpet premieres and going to convention, shaking hands and kissing babies, so to speak.
So you think that initially this is kind of standard business 101, where you have a new company coming in and then they evaluate, the situation, and then heads roll, and then they put who they want to be in charge.
Yeah,
they
point.
Put them in.
That's a good point.
To take their place. So this could be just kind of standard business 101. Is that what you're kind of saying, Joe?
Yeah, because for people who don't know me, I've been in the comic scene the past couple of years, the indie comic scene specifically, but I come from a background in corporate business, and I spent about a decade at a big tech company. And in big tech, you see a lot of things moving very quickly, and there's a lot of mergers, acquisitions, spin-offs, divestments of divisions, that sort of thing. And so over a decade, I got to be pretty good at reading the tea leaves, so to speak, being able to figure out when a particular division was going to get spun off, if we were going to acquire a company, what would that mean for the existing employees within the corporation, that sort of a thing. And one of the things that I can tell you from seeing this happen many, many times, and in some cases being somewhat involved in the details of it, is that there's always an evaluation of what was there before, what is the assessment of how that organization affected the bottom line.
Right.
And then there's an evaluation of who do we, as the group coming in, who do we have that can take over and prune the dead wood, so to speak, so that the plant can blossom with new life. And there's always somebody who's brought in to oversee that process.
And there always has to be the sacrifice. There always has to be somebody, that gets sacrificed in the process. So I just want to say something about Dan as a person. I always liked Dan DiDio. Like, I always thought he was a great guy. And when Marvel fired me and treated me really, really horribly way back when, DC heard about this, and DiDio, he kind of came to me, and he was saying, like, you have a home here if you want. So he extended his hand out, and so I was so burned out on comics, I ended up taking 2 years off of comics, and then I did after that. I took him up on it, and he not only beat my Marvel rate, which was already the highest at Marvel at the time, he actually beat it to get me over to DC. So he always treated me really, really well. And when Dan first took over DC, from my perspective, DC, the reason they were hurting was because they were not wooing talent. They were not competitive as far as wages and as far as opportunity for creative people. So one of the things Dan did early on is he let the creative people do what creative people do. He kind of got out of the way, and then he paid them a bunch of money to do it, which is, you still need, editorial, and you still need to guide people, but that's really a great place and to work at. And it's a great leadership model for doing comic books, quite frankly, because it's kind of becomes a creator haven, and then you can come up with the ideas and then get rewarded for those financially. And that was initially, at least from my perspective, what I saw of DC Comics at the time. When DiDio first started over there, that's what he was doing. And if you notice, he was getting a lot of good talent, and also to DC's credit. And this was before Jim Lee. DiDio was paying inkers good money, and he was treating them right. Because if you notice early on with DiDio, all the best inkers in the business went over to DC Comics because they were paid better and they were treated better. And so Dan did that. He treated talent very, very well. And the DC regime before that were very, very tight. I remember having a conversation with Mike Carlin, and Mike Carlin told me, because I was asking him for more money, he said, this is it. He said, you're already capped. You're at a salary cap. And I said, so there's no more money for me to make here. And he's like, there's no more money for you to make here. I said, well, why would I work here then if I have no future, if I can't go anywhere beyond this? And he just shrugged his shoulders and then walked away. So the thing is, that's how DC was before the DiDio. They did not play very well, and they were very, very tight with the money. And they didn't seem to care. So that was early on with Dan. What I noticed, and I'm not trying to place blame, but this is just my observation. Dan started changing, and a lot of these bigger initiatives started a little bit when Jim Lee started coming into more of prominence with the company. And if you notice, a lot of the big crossovers and a lot of these ideas, they mirror Wildstorm. They mirrored the way Jim ran Wildstorm, and Jim drove Wildstorm. This is just me. I love Jim. Jim gave me a lot of opportunities. So I'm just trying to be honest, and from my point of view, I'm not trying to, throw shade on anybody or say anybody's bad or evil or whatever. But I do think that Jim started running DC Comics a lot like Wildstorm, and there was a lot of similarities with big events, and then running those, and then running those into the ground, and then starting another one, canceling a book, and then starting it up with a number one. All those same traits and all those same business moves were done at Wildstorm. So this is just me. I don't know how much of it was truly DiDio, and I don't know how much of it was truly Jim Lee. I do know that Jim Lee is kind of a Teflon guy, and people in the industry really, really love that guy. And I'm no exception. But to be honest, I would rather see Jim Lee draw comics than run a comic book company. That's just me personally. And I think that maybe some of these ideas were more Jim than you might realize. I think that Dan was the face of the company, but also by being the face of the company, you end up, because if you say bad news, then people are going to hate you. They're not going to see beyond you. They're going to see you, and then they're going to attack you. They're not going to think beyond that. So I think a lot of these problems weren't just DiDio. I think these were kind of company-wide problems, and possibly even Diane Nelson, because when they moved the publishing from New York to Burbank, I thought, like, and knowing her background, I thought, okay, DC's trying to get into Hollywood. You know what I mean? They're trying to influence these comic book properties, these theatrical movies, and all this other stuff. But what happened was, even Diane Nielsen, I've seen articles, she admits that she's never even read a DC comic book, that she couldn't keep up with the books, and that she doesn't read them. How do you have somebody in charge of a, DC, comics company and not know that stuff? It'd be like, Kevin Feige at Marvel, like admitting that he never read a Marvel comic book. Well, why do you have this position? You know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of weird stuff going on at DC Comics that was beyond just Dan DiDio. So I just wanted to throw in like some insight there.
Yeah, well, that's actually something I'm worried about. That Dan DiDio is the one that's kind of holding other things back that are probably far worse. So I'm expecting what to come next is probably going to be worse off.
Well, I'm just going to cut to the chase, because I had this chambered. Is if Bendis takes over DC Comics is doomed. Because
my God,
based on his track record at Marvel, and you talk about an agenda-driven, universe. That's once again, I want to back up. I have nothing against Bendis. He's a great guy. He's defended me a couple times at DC Comics. I like a lot of his writing. There's some stuff I don't like, but I liked a lot of his writing in the early days. I thought that the Ultimate Spider-Man was very, very well done. I thought his Ultimates ideas were pretty good at the beginning. So. But the Bendis today is not the same Bendis, and you can see, like, as soon as he came in DC, he was like, oh, well, Superman is now, the Kents are Jewish, and then the Super Sons book that I was working on with Peter Tomasi and Carlo Barberi gets canceled. It was one of the better books they had, and then they canceled it just because Bendis wanted to have the Superman universe. You know what I mean? And he wanted it, without any baggage. He wanted to be able to have a clean slate. So why do you give somebody like this? I don't know whose fault this was, whether it was DiDio's, Jim Lee's or whoever, but they gave that guy too much power. And I think he hasn't earned it as far as I'm concerned.
It's true. If I can give a little note of something I heard once.
Yep.
I think it was a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. I'm not sure. But one thing you guys might not be aware of is Jim Lee is heavily involved in the Pantheon creation. That's the MMO. It's an MMORPG that's going on, and he's very much involved with it. I don't know if he's doing art, or I don't know exactly what his involvement is, but he's been on some of their private streams several times. And I'm part of the Pantheon beta and stuff like that, or pre-alpha, I guess you call it. I'm just one of many, right? But of course, I get to listen to these things. And there was the occasion where they're going through showing things and demonstrating various aspects of the game, where he's playing a character, he's running right along with them, and they asked him. They were asking him questions about, DC, and he says, "I can't really, I'm not allowed to talk about those things, right?" And okay, an NDA or whatever. But then one of the guys said, "Well, yeah, but aren't you the boss?" And he laughed.
Okay, there you go.
So,
Chester, I think he was doing what he did with DCU online or something more comprehensive?
I really wish they'd tell us because he's been involved for a long time, dude. And this, of course, is a fantasy-based thing. It's not like DC Online, which was awesome. But I feel that he's somehow involved with art direction or something. I'm not sure. It's obviously something that they're not allowed to talk about, either because they have an NDA with Jim himself, or I don't know. But clearly he's involved. Now, I guess it could be as simple as he's just a fan. And it's Jim Lee, and of course he gets a seat. I mean, it's that kind of thing, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. But he's been on many streams, not only the private ones, he's on some of the public ones too, guys. If you go check out Pantheon, some of the developer videos, you'll find Jim on there. But he does the private ones as well. And it was an offhand thing. It doesn't really mean much, but he seemed to think from his response that he doesn't have any authority at all. That's why I was speaking the way I was earlier.
Yeah, I would love for, I just want DC to succeed. I think a healthy comics industry, Marvel, DC, all of us, it helps everybody, so I don't want to see anybody go out of business. I don't want to see anybody lose their job. I don't want to see any of those things happen. And I would love that maybe Jim Lee is a behind the scenes player that just hasn't had a voice yet, and that maybe he'll be able to step up and he'll be able to, implement his ideas, that maybe there was a regime that was holding him back. All I know is that Bendis is not the answer, and that I would like to see, personally, I would like to see Geoff Johns step into that position, because I think that they tried to do that with him and the film, and in the film division, and so he did kind of greenlight some good ideas, because I think he didn't get credit for it, but Aquaman and was it even Shazam was kind of on his watch. But then, he got fired, because the Justice League or whatever. Like, the way things work, it's like not always the right guy gets fired. So he was dethroned from that position. And I would like to see him kind of step into, overseeing the DC, universe, and possibly if Warner Brothers and AT&T could give him the power that he would need. That's the big if, and get out of his way and let him actually do what he thinks is right. I think that would be the only hope I see within the people that we have, that we know are over there and actively working at DC in any kind of position that can make these decisions, because they got rid of Diane Nielsen and now they got rid of Dan DiDio. So really the only ones over there are Bendis, John.
How about Weeks?
Lee Weeks?
Yeah.
Just an artist.
He's a great artist, but I don't think he has any kind of inclination or drive to take over a corporation.
Yeah, he teaches at the Kubert School too. So.
I would love to see Pete Tomasi go back into editing and either EIC or even publisher. I think it'd be a fantastic fit.
Yes, I think he understands, like him and Johns. Oh my gosh, if he and Johns had a chance to kind of, because if you think about it, like the early Green Lantern, all that stuff, that was Pete Tomasi and John.
That's a fair point.
Johns. Yeah, so if you think about that, that's a great observation. I think that could be the savior, but it's still going to depend on if AT&T have enough faith in them. So, do you guys want to get into the G5 or? Go ahead.
There's one huge problem with giving Geoff Johns that title right now is that Batman is their major title, and Geoff Johns cannot write Batman at all. He's just horrible with it.
Write it. All he has to do is put the right people in charge of it. We just need leadership. We need somebody that has a good overview. And as far as I'm concerned, whenever I've seen companies work best, publishing companies like DC Marvel, is when editors kind of suggest or like publishers suggest. They don't dictate. They guide by suggestion. They don't have like a major overview or that kind of control. And what I've seen in the last couple years is that comic book, probably last 10 years, comic book companies have become more like corporate guys are mandating agendas instead of having it editorial and having it creator based, because I think that they feel they need to justify a paycheck. So like I remember working with Bob Harris on the X books. He just knew what was working, right? He knew that Jim Lee, Will Spertasio, me, Scott Williams, and John Byrne and Chris Claremont were rocking it. You know what I mean? So he just got out of the way. He just facilitated and make sure that everybody was taken care of and that schedules were met and all those things. But he would be the first to tell you that he kind of just got out of the way and let everybody do their thing. So I think that's a key component too, is to find leadership that can hire the right people and then kind of get out of the way. Trust that they're going to be able to do it, and then get the heck out of the way. So
can I ask you a question, Art?
Yes.
When you were over at DC for all that time, what did you ever see or have any interaction with any of the Warner Brothers executives? I mean, what do we got? We got Tsujihara's in charge now, right? But did you ever see them ever communicating with you guys? Was there any like big meetings where they talked to the whole crew, or was there anything like that, or was it just completely departmentalized?
It's completely departmentalized. Like when DC was in New York City, they were in the Time Warner building and they just had a floor to themselves. I don't think they interacted much at all. And I've only been at the DC Burbank facility 3 times, I believe. And I have never seen anything like that. Although I think with Diane Nielsen coming in, I think there probably was more of that, because I believe DC, and this might be the problem as well, that they had like it was the 4 of them, right? They had Diane, they had DiDio, they had Lee, and then they had Johns. And I think the 4 of them really had Hollywood stars in their eyes, because I don't know if it was Warner Brothers that mandated the move to Burbank or if it was Diane trying to get closer and infiltrate, Warner Brothers, the film division, because Marvel had a brain trust early on with the films. They had they had Joe Quesada, they had Mark Miller, they had Bendis. Yeah, they had Bendis when Bendis was still hot and doing good stuff. And I even think what was the editor? Tom Brevoort was part of the brain trust. And so those guys were like the street cred for Marvel in the first phase. So their names are even in the credits and stuff like that. And for the most part, I think they did listen to those guys, at least early on in the development of the Marvel cinematic universe. And I think Diane and Jim and Dan and Johns had expectations and thought that maybe they could be the brain trust for the DC, cinematic universe. We obviously saw how that worked out, and Geoff Johns actually did make a play and got in there. So there is some proof and truth to that.
Art, would you like a little corporate cutthroat philosophy applied to this situation?
Sure.
So I wish I had a big board with little thumbtacks and strings going all over the place, because there's a little web of contacts going on here, but I'll try to keep this very concise and clear. I'll start by saying that Geoff Johns and Kevin Feige are friends, and they came up together, and they were actually roommates at one time. And they've stayed in touch as they both have become very successful in their careers. Now, if you look at Kevin Feige and the MCU and the way those films were made in the beginning, they had that Marvel brain trust that we were just talking about that had input on the films. And by all accounts, both inside the MCU and at Marvel Comics and countless media sources, the static between Kevin Feige and the Marvel Brain Trust started fairly early. And I want to say it was around the first Avengers film. And then apparently the Marvel Brain Trust kept trying to insinuate themselves further and further into the filmmaking process, and Kevin Feige kept pushing back harder and harder. And when Disney bought the whole shebang and the MCU had really taken off, Kevin Feige, after proving to Disney that he was the most qualified person to continue helming the ship, basically said, I'm done with Ike Perlmutter. He's interfering far too early and often in our filmmaking. And from what I understand, again, I wasn't there in the room, so I'm not trying to claim insider knowledge based on personally being there. This is just me studying a whole lot of what other people have been saying and kind of corroborating it with other reports and so forth. So apparently Feige goes to Bob Iger and says, Perlmutter is too big of an obstacle. We've got billions of dollars to make. Could you please get him out of the way? And supposedly that's when Perlmutter gets sidelined along with the rest of the Marvel Brain Trust. And if you can actually go back to social media and see where those guys were making snide comments about it, people like Quesada and Bendis and so forth. And then fast forward a few years later, Kevin Feige is put in charge of Marvel Comics in addition to the MCU. You with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's power. It's like
right.
Yeah.
Now, if we think back to the fact that Feige and Johns came up together, were good friends, were roommates at one point, and have stayed in touch this whole time. And they actually did some interviews not that long ago. If I remember correctly, it was around summer of 2019. And they were talking about how they were still friends and how they still kept in touch. Well, if you look at what happened with DC, Geoff Johns at one point was made chief creative officer of the comics, and he was also working on the films. Now, EVS had a live stream earlier today where he was talking about all of this stuff with DiDio and the future of DC, and he was saying how in, I believe it was 2016, where he was in Burbank, and Geoff Johns was showing him all of the the secret plans that they were going to be doing, not just with Green Lantern as a result of the Rebirth Initiative, but the whole company. And he had things mapped out for several months, and he was saying, this is what we're going to do. It's going to be great. We're going to return DC to the glory days, et cetera, et cetera. And then EVS was saying that minutes after that, Geoff got pulled away to do something. Ethan said that Geoff would go in there with the DC writers and editors and work with them in the mornings, and then in the afternoons and evenings he would be working on film and TV. So Geoff gets pulled away, and this is literally the same day. This is just after Geoff has finished giving EVS the tour, and he said that DiDio pulled him to the side and said, don't listen to what he was saying about Rebirth. It's not going to last. And Ethan was saying, what do you mean? Geoff just laid out all of this stuff. And DiDio apparently said, it's not going to last. We're already planning what to do after Rebirth. So fast forward now to Rebirth being sabotaged, replaced, the 5G initiative being spearheaded by DiDio. DiDio today, we find out, gets shown the door. Geoff Johns is still involved at the WB level, doing a little bit with DC in terms of writing,
Right.
but not nearly in terms of editorial. That he used to have a lot of sway with editorial. Now it's more just writing as far as the comics go. But now, if you think about it, DiDio, who is his big obstacle within DC, is gone. I could potentially see, and I'm not saying I'm predicting this. I'm just saying I think it's possible. I could see a possibility where, much like Kevin Feige, Geoff Johns is going to somebody higher up, whether it's WB, whether it's AT&T, I have no idea. But from a corporate business perspective, it would make perfect sense, and it would be a cutthroat move, but some might say a justifiable move, depending on your perspective, to go way above DiDio's head, get some things straightened out, get some agreements worked out. DiDio gets moved out. Johns has responsibility over film and TV. If he can hit a home run or two, he might get put back in charge of the comics division and then end up in a similar position to what Kevin Feige has with the MCU and Marvel Comics today.
Yeah, the thing is, and the sad truth of a lot of this is, I think a single vision works best in a lot of cases. When you have too many cooks in the kitchen, you can really screw up something that initially starts off good.
Mm-hmm.
So if Johns can get into a position where he's not challenged quite as much as he has in the past and has the opportunity to have a vision and to follow it through. See, that's the problem with a lot of these corporations, is the ability to follow through on these ideas, because it's not only the here and now, it's years down the line. These things take years to build. I mean, look at the Marvel universe, the cinematic universe, all that stuff. I mean, that didn't happen overnight. And those guys had a vision of, like, this is phase one, this is phase two, all of those ideas. So when you have that, you can kind of have a straight and narrow path without a bunch of obstacles and I guess it's detours, right? But when you have a lot of corporate people and different people that have a say, a lot of times those ideas can get watered down. And I did not know that. So these initiatives, like the New 52 and was New 52 DiDio's complete? Was that his idea? No, nobody else's?
From what I understand, he spearheaded it. Jim Lee had a lot of input on the costume designs and some of the, as Chester was saying earlier in the conversation, some of the creative input, but the whole reason behind it, as relayed by people who worked for him during that time, EVS is one. There have been others who have come out and said that New 52 was Dan's baby, and he had said to them internally that, it's the same old story, that continuity is too convoluted, people don't know, new readers can't jump in because they can't figure out who's who and what's what, so we're going to reboot everything and streamline it.
I think that's a lot of people passing the buck, honestly. Because I remember reading interviews from back then, and it was everyone was happy and wanted to do that. And then, within a year, everyone was mad at each other and because it wasn't working out.
Yeah.
So the first year of New 52 was monumental.
It was awesome.
I mean, they were breaking records and stuff like that. I just think, just like we were talking, whether it was bad conception, like it was badly conceived at the beginning, or if too many people down the line started sabotaging it and getting, their fingers into the cake. But that was not a very good, ongoing idea. Like it fell apart within the second year pretty quickly. And every initiative and every big crossover they've done since has done pretty much had the same pattern. They've all kind of come on strong and then just kind of fall apart.
Well, it's because they're trying to fix what New 52 went wrong with. And because they're trying to fix it, and New 52 doesn't make a whole lot of sense to begin with, and they're trying to fix it by appeasing some of the fans, but they're also trying to not appease the fans.
Yeah.
It sort of breaks it even more.
Or maybe if we go with what Buns just said, maybe Johns was sabotaging that, and there's been this infighting going on for quite a long time.
It's interesting because I had thought, and I'm a big fan of what Geoff Johns did with the Green Lantern rebirth, Flash rebirth, and then eventually what he tried to do with the whole DCU rebirth initiative. I thought it started out well and then got derailed, whether you believe it was sabotaged or just wasn't managed properly. I mean, there's different perspectives, and I certainly respect different opinions on it, but the main thing that I think a lot of us, myself included, kind of lost sight of was that after Johns was pushed out of his creative officer position and was more or less relegated to the bench, so we thought, it's starting to look like he may have actually been working some business connections he had made higher up the chain with WB. And it's totally possible that when AT&T came in, that if Johns had WB connections that outranked whoever was backing Dan DiDio, it could explain, and again, this is pure speculation, I've got no solid information on this, but it could explain DiDio getting the boot. And then if we see Johns move back into the position, either chief creative officer or editor-in-chief or publisher or anything of that stature, then I'm not a gambler, but I would bet big money that he had somebody that he was working with higher up the chain, and then this whole time he's kind of been laying low and then made his move.
Well, also, if you think about it, like if we know it, the Warner executives know it too. The successes that DC had with Shazam and with Aquaman were the Geoff Johns stuff. He got thrown under the bus, like they needed a sacrificial lamb, so he got caught up into that. I don't know how they work those things, but I heard somebody on like Midnight Edge talk about it, where like the past sins are like you inherit those. So for some reason, the movies that came before the Zack Snyder stuff and those they needed a sacrificial lamb. So then Johns and his partner were the ones that got canned. But everybody knows the truth. The truth is that they're the ones that were involved with those two pictures, and they did very, very well. So he does have, maybe not on paper, but I think people that are following and paying attention know that Geoff Johns has a pretty good track record.
Well, just because something makes money doesn't mean it's good.
Right.
Sure. And there's also...
But for the execs and the shareholders, it does.
That's true.
And it's been shown that WB, and if you think of what Wonder Woman was like, the film, and Art, we were talking about this a couple days ago on stream, how it seems like the first 2/3 of the movie was directed by Patty Jenkins, and then most of the last third seems like it was directed by some WB schmuck.
It was what is his name?
Well, and then with
the director, Zack Snyder,
with Aquaman, that was also a very uneven film. Now, my wife and I thought it was entertaining. We thought it was a fun popcorn movie, but it was by no means a great film in our opinion. We thought it was an entertaining one, but that one also, to me, seemed like there was one vision for some parts and then a competing vision for others. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if Geoff, through his dealings with Warner Brothers, got burned by the WB studio people and then figured out who he could ally himself with as far as the WB people that were handling DC Comics. Because the comics and the films, they're separate groups.
Yes, definitely.
They're totally separate divisions. They do not play in the same playground.
But Geoff Johns does.
Even at DC.
Yeah, Geoff Johns moves from one playground to the other. That's
right. So there's a connecting point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
He's the common denominator.
Yeah, so for the most part, this has turned into a Geoff Johns conversation.
Yeah, right.
But so we're kind of in agreement that, are we that Geoff Johns may be the heir apparent, and if so, are we kind of thinking that that's the best hope for DC at this point?
I would say he's a possible candidate.
But what does the young lad Zach think?
Yeah, I've been sitting here this whole entire time. I came into all this really, really unknowing exactly what the politics were of it. Other than what I've heard, pretty much Chester complain about almost every day that he talks about comics. Just this, but mostly I'm just seeing, this influx of trying to sell these ideas to a really small minority, and it feels like DiDio had good intentions, but then the more I read about him, it feels like he fell into the whole entire get woke, go broke thing, and I really wonder because there was talk when AT&T bought Warner Brother or DC Comics and everything, that they were pretty much trying to phase down the comics anyways, right?
Possibly. I mean, that's one of the speculations that they might shut DC down completely, and that's going to lead into the whole 5G, which there's speculation that if the 5G universe goes belly up, then that is going to be the death of DC Comics.
Okay, then DC's dead then.
I heard the 5G was canceled, by the way, though.
Yeah, because Didio's out, right?
Yeah, AT&T does not like the idea of aging out Batman and Superman. And
Somebody had mentioned that in the chat, and I had replied to them that I would be, although I personally would be happy about that, I would be shocked if they actually did it. And the reason why is that publishing lead times are so long. It takes there's the creative work is done months ahead of time, and for the solicits to be in place and for everything to be distributed, I would think they'd have to have a replacement for 5G. If they were going to cancel an initiative that big, just from a publisher's perspective, I couldn't see them doing it unless they already had a replacement in place. And I'm not sure how they would, because the lead times are so long in publishing. I personally don't think they've had enough time to come up with a replacement.
Well, there's also been editorial staff that have quit over the 5G idea.
Great
So,
point.
Buns, you and I are in agreement. I think the aging out, but keeping some classic books, but aging them out is a good idea. But Art's going to yell at us. He's definitely going to yell at us.
So Joe, you think aging them out is a good idea?
Well, no, I think that ultimately that tearing down the product line is a good idea. And whether you age out some characters or whether you simply cancel some titles, I mean, it really depends on who is running the show. But ultimately, I think we have to remember AT&T bought Warner Brothers, which owns DC, for those in the chat who may not be totally clear on that. DC's parent company is Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers' parent company is now AT&T. The whole reason AT&T did that is because they are hundreds of billions of dollars in debt. Now, I've seen numbers thrown around saying that there's something like $4 billion in debt. Accounting can be done countless different ways. What I've seen from the big boy accountants is that it's actually hundreds of billions. And what AT&T is interested in is having an endless intellectual property farm that they can use to fuel their streaming content plans. And so no matter what happens to DC Comics, I think it's going to go through massive changes along with the rest of the comic book industry in the next few years, including this one. But whatever happens with DC, I don't think we'll ever see it completely shut down. I think we'll see it change drastically, and I think Marvel is going to do the same thing. I think Disney has big plans for Marvel. And while from some people's perspective, I think changes will be so drastic that they'll see it as a collapse of the comic book industry. I think it's more that it's going to go through massive changes, and it's going to look very different from what we've always known it to be. But there's no way that they're giving up that intellectual property.
There's no way. Like DC, DC has always been. DC has always been a tax write-off for Warner Brothers. They've always been that. The publishing company has always been at a loss. So the way Warner Brothers makes profit off DC is just to write it off on their taxes. But the intellectual property, the IPs, the licensing is where they clean up. So the Underoos, the all the merchandising and stuff is where the money's at. That's why you see Marvel and even DC talking about a lifestyle brand, because at this point they're just like, let's just embrace it. You know what I mean? Let's just F the comic books and let's just embrace the lifestyle thing. And then comics just falls into that category. And that might be what you're talking about, like changing the landscape. The landscape might become totally just a lifestyle brand, and comic books are just like T-shirts now, or Underoos, or Pops figures, or whatever the hell it is. It's just another licensing avenue versus what it once was a proud publishing company that kicked ass.
Can I have a little insight into the point you just made, because we do see, particularly with Marvel, seems to be inching closer and closer to simply shutting down the comic books. We already see them moving stuff out to IDW and et cetera, just licensing out the comic book option. But to give a little insight into that, over here where I live, I see a lot of kids walking around with Marvel shirts, Marvel bags, Marvel everything. But then I asked them a question. I was like, "Oh, that's nice. So who's your favorite Marvel character?" They can't name one. It's just Marvel, right? So there is some of that going on. But at the same time, we see Europe is going through a golden age of comic books. Over here in Asia, manga is absolutely thrashing it, dude. They are making hand over fist, dude. The amount of money they're making here in Asia off of manga, and it's even got to the point that it's going over into America. But yet, American comics are on their knees. Many years ago, Dungeons and Dragons, of course, was owned by Hasbro. At that time, they still are. They made a decision that they were going to start printing Dragon magazine, right? And I'm sure many people did what I did, but I sent a letter to the company, an actual letter, right? And they responded, which is pretty cool. That they bothered to take that time, but telling them that this is really not a good idea. And they said, well, the world's going forward digitally, and there's not going to be no more magazines in 10 years. And of course, what's the reality? Magazines have going through a golden age pop right now. They're all over the place. These boutique magazines are everyone wants a book in their hand. And of course, what does WotC do with their Dragon? They're still being stubborn, persistently doing it digitally, and they refuse to put a book out, even though there's tons of magazines coming out right now. Right. So we see these kind of corporate thinkers that think that they see the future, but of course they don't. And that's what screws things up. So, I mean, there's just a few analogies to kind of attach to all the little points you were making. And it's weird, man.
You angry, Chester? You angry?
A little bit.
You get fired up?
A little.
I think
Well, also that's why I never say never. When people say hello, Joe. When people say comics is dead, I disagree, because if you can have a country like Japan that's absolutely in love with reading manga, and that's basically a comic book, then why can't that exist here? Publishing, for the most part, everybody says is dead, but then how come you have this huge comic book reading population in the Asian countries? You know what I mean? Like what is their business model that this one just isn't? So it can be done. That's another problem. Like all the stuff that we always talk about, is like, oh, if they just could get a crossover event that works, or if they just had the right editor, or they had the right creative team. The thing is, even if they had the best working on these books, it isn't going to make any difference from my point of view, because they still are not putting any money in advertising and promoting. And the reason why Warner Brothers or Disney or whoever doesn't is because I'm totally convinced of this, is they make more on the tax deductions than they do off the profitability. If they start trying to make these publishing companies profitable, then it's a riskier proposition for them and the shareholders. If they keep the status quo going, then they get the tax deduction, they build the IPs for them for next to nothing, and then they get to license the shit out of them. And that to me, I'm 100% sure that that's the business model that these corporations have. I know it sounds horrible, but I don't think we're ever, because the thing is, this is how I feel. If people want change, we can make change. You know what I mean? People can do things. It's not impossible. And like Chester says, in Japan, they're flourishing. They're doing well. It can happen, but you have to make up your mind to make it happen. You have to put resources behind it. You have to start putting money into advertising and getting these books into the general population. I know I say this all the time, but I'm going to say it till I can't say it anymore. The real problem is always just promoting and getting these books into a more visible place where people, just average people, can see them and pick them up.
I can answer your question, Art.
Good. Great.
Yeah. The reason why comics are doing really well here, and I think it's also, Europe as well. We got to keep in mind, comic books in Europe are massive, right? But the reason why is very simple: free market, right? The people are able to create a book. If it is liked, then it makes money, and it becomes pushed and therefore promoted more. You don't have anyone standing in the way of what people want to consume. Nowhere. In America, you have a lot of people in the way of what people want to consume, because you're not right to want to consume that. I'm going to teach you what you need to consume. That's the real big problem. I agree with the advertisement and stuff like that, especially promoting to children. I agree. But that's the real ticket. That's the real secret to it. They just don't get in the way of it. They let the consumer buy what they want.
That's also a fairly recent thing that has happened. With the more progressive points of view. The comics industry has been suffering from this for decades. I think it's exposure. There's just not enough exposure, because there have been some really, really great comic books out there that just sell average because no one knows they exist. I think the key really is just, it is advertising, and then creating properties and IPs that people want to read. So I agree on some level, the free market and letting people make up their own minds and not push an agenda. But if people don't even know that there is an agenda or there is a comic book, then they're not going to get, what I mean? Then it doesn't affect. Yeah.
Well, a shallow analysis is simply that every time they allow themselves growth in characters, they have a boom. Silver Age is harkened by Alan West and Hal Jordan. Those two characters and a few others launched the Silver Age. They were new characters, new IPs to build on. And then the last one had Deadpool and all these other characters that were launched during that period. And it seems that Western comics keep on having these cycles of launching new characters and then just holding everything back after that point. And so you get really, really static nonsense. And it seems like a lot of it is that they want to keep on trying to sell the same IPs rather than grow and make more.
Well, there's actually a pattern, Druck, and it's a great point that you're bringing up. And I remember having a conversation when I first broke into the industry with Jim Valentino, and Jim told me, even then, this is 36 years ago, he told me DC will always shoot themselves in the foot. It was already the pattern. They can build stuff. They can actually bring in ideas that will change the entire industry, but they just will not be able to sustain it. Where Marvel can sustain even a kind of medium, level idea. They can kind of milk it and turn it into a success. DC has the hardest time sustaining it. And maybe it's because it is more corporate, or at least at the time was more corporate than Marvel was. Marvel really was a publishing company unto itself. They didn't really answer to anybody. DC is always, they were always upstate New York City. They were always, with the Time Warners, and Marvel was in Publisher Row. So they were in there with the riffraff. So DC has always been way more corporate. And have their overlords, and maybe because of the overlords, they had way more fingers in the pie and would screw things up inevitably.
Well, that's your answer for why the Asian market is actually doing so much better. It's because it's pretty much based completely on merit and bringing new IPs to the thing, and it also doesn't have to have all that overhead. Whereas to make a really good DC book or a really good Marvel book, you have to know the lore, you have to know all that stuff. That's become really, really hard to do, and they're not willing to fund people to actually do that, to keep track of it. Whereas if you get a new manga, well, that's just one guy or two guys or three guys working, and they know the entire story. They're putting out the entire story. The IP is being worked on by people that are really enthusiastic about it, and you have new stuff that you can put out every single year. So that's how they keep on growing.
Well, let me ask you this. I don't really know the mechanics of it. So is manga kind of like individuals that create things and then they publish under this one banner? So it's like a bunch of independents that are publishing under like this manga banner? Or is it like a DC where there's a universe and that they basically control that universe? I'm not sure how it really
not
works.
at all. Go ahead, dude.
Yeah, it's more... Well, if you're talking about the lowest end, there's manga shows where they have like doujinshi. Am I saying that right? Is that the right word? Where it's like all independent and they're not constrained by just about anything. And those independent shows is where people kind of get found. And then they also have this other area, which is the publishing arm, which is the more professional thing, where people create their IP and then they submit it to a company like Shonen Jump or I don't know, other ones. There's different ones, but it's basically anthology work after that. And those anthologies, you get like 20 stories per book. Every time the book comes out, it asks, what's your favorite thing here? Those things, when people submit that back, that determines who keeps on going in the book.
And those also become the lead stories. I have a few of those. Yeah. I just didn't know how it worked. So there are publishers then that do, but they're all like independent ideas that come up. It's not necessarily a shared universe, right?
Yeah, no, that's very true. There is no universe type of thing. You basically, as Dragon said, you have a bunch of independents who submit, and you have a lot of companies, not just Shonen, but these big trade, they kind of like anthology trade books, will represent different parts of the manga world, meaning this is like a girl drama, or this is like sports-based drama, or whatever. But one of the things they do here that's very interesting, and they don't understand how we do things. They think what we do is very strange. You have usually one person does everything. It's not two or three. It's usually one.
Well,
and that person does the art and the writing, right? And then when we have books that keep continuing and you have new artists and new writers come on, they don't get that. They're like, well, how could someone else write my this guy's creation? They think that's a very strange thing. But in general, Dragon's very correct. It's a very open market, and you can throw in, and you have these big trade books that come out weekly. It's ridiculous the amount of work comes out, and they just keep throwing it at the public, and whatever they like, they push it forward. And if they get enough success, they will take that and put it into a smaller, its own individual book where they'll color it. And then they usually can become quite big there. And if they become popular in that format, well, then they turn it over to the anime division. And that's where you get into something more common to what you're used to in the West, where there's a ton of professional people sitting in an office working day-to-day, slaving away to create that anime.
So do you think then, having said, what you said, and then comparing it to like Western comics, like mainly Marvel, DC, then is the real problem continued continuity, like a shared universe? Do you think it was better when DC and Marvel did more one and dones? There was like Marvel was always conceived as a universe, but DC was not. But even the early Marvel books, there was crossover, but it was very controlled and was never like officially like this is the Marvel universe. Yeah. So do you think maybe more one and dones and more like if it's Batman books, then they're just Batman books. They're not like always crossing over or like this storyline affects this other storyline in another book and so on and so forth.
It's better for the entry level.
That's the reason. I think that we need to adapt some of that stuff from the Asian market, but you can also, you mentioned the European market, which is all prestige format stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
So how are they successful? And the complete opposite is successful. So it's
Europeans are driven by the visual, though. That's for sure.
And the Europeans, you can pick those books up in a lot of different venues, even in Canada. This was years ago, but you can have access to that stuff more readily than you can, like, mainstream comic books here.
Mm.
So, I think the thing is that American comics are sort of lost in that they don't know whether to go prestige or completely cheaping out to the more manga style of newsprint, and many people coming on and just throwing everything at the wall, which is pretty much the Asian model, versus having just the elites do the stuff.
Yeah,
and you have something in the middle and it's mixed up, and you're just sort of like going in neutral. You're not getting anywhere with it. And what's being produced is just terrible.
Yeah, I think it would really be hard to do that with Marvel and DC, though. But what would be interesting is like almost like a 3-prong attack, like make an entry level like DC universe, like just a universal universe, and make that kind of, let's just say, newsstand oriented. So that's your entry level. That's your everyman's comic. And you don't get overly crossover. Like there's one Batman book. There's one Superman book, maybe Justice League is an annual and is published once a year, and you get all those characters in one book, so you have something to look forward to. And then you just kind of condense the line of books down to a handful that you can put successfully on a newsstand, and some kid could just buy one Batman book, and that's it. Have a great ass Batman adventure, and then move on with his life. Or if he still likes it, then he can come back next month or start buying Superman or whatever. Strip it down to like what it used to be, kind of that way. And then maybe, just so we don't forget about our brethren, which is the retailers, the comic shops and those guys, then maybe do what you're talking about, Dirac, and do your prestige kind of format stuff and get those in, make them more collectibles, like doing the crowdfunding stuff. So I've been thinking about this a lot lately, is, you have maybe an entry level book, like a black and white, newsprint kind of book, entry level, but then you have your bells and whistles book too, and take it as far as that the backers will go. You get hardback, you can go, like all this collectible, like, foil and, all these enhancements to make it more collectible, but you always have your entry level book that's for the masses, for the general population. And then at this point, then you can have almost like two markets. You can have your high-end collectible market, that's the newsstand. I mean, not the newsstands, but the comic book specialty stores. They can still carry those other books if they want to, but they don't have to. So there's an actual book market that's tailored just for the collectible, the collectors. So then the retail stores become more of like a niche, which is what they are. They become more of high-end collectible shops. And then we get the comic books, the entry-level stuff, in as many venues as we possibly can. Just saturate the countryside with these books. And then, if you want your ongoing major storylines, then do that for maybe more of an adult audience, more of, like the collectible markets, and then do your Elseworld stories and all the cutting edge stuff that you want to do it that way. And then, it's a win-win. Then if people want that high-end cool stuff, they can go to their retail, their comic book shop. And if they're just the casual and they just want a good, entertaining story and find some kind of, escapism for 20 minutes, they can just get their comic book at the newsstand or, check it out at their local, supermarkets or wherever.
Yeah. How are they not doing this though, Art? I don't get it. I mean, imagine if comic book stands were in 7-Elevens. Just imagine. And the thing that kills me too is Japanese own 7-Eleven now. They bought it.
I don't have to imagine that. I remember it.
Yeah, so do I. But I'm like, why in the hell aren't they doing that? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, because like what I was trying to explain earlier, and this is, see, as well as I do, Chester, Todd knows this, and Draken knows, we've been talking about this for months now. I don't think DC and Marvel want to change their business model, because a lot of things that we've said, these ideas that we've come up with, and I've heard other people on streams say similar things, if not, even better ideas, even though they haven't, but I was just trying to give them some kind of credit, is that they don't want to. They make more money as a tax deduction. They make more money by not trying to create a success, because how do you justify a paycheck if you work for DC and Marvel and your job description is marketing? Well, what the hell are you doing for that paycheck? Marketing?
Have you ever
take an ad in Diamond distribution catalog?
Right, right. That's ridiculous.
Have you ever seen the manga shops that they have in Japan?
Yeah, but they're not manga shops, dude. They're bookstores.
Bookstores, yeah.
Yeah. And they're everywhere. And you can buy books, you can buy manga, you can buy magazines, all the thing, and a bunch of other stuff too. They're everywhere. Anywhere you go, you can find manga. You go to the convenience store, it's there. You go to the supermarkets, they're there on shelves in the front. Everywhere you go, there's manga everywhere. Even when you go into like dentist's office or doctor office or anything like that, they'll have a bunch of stuff that they purchased for you to sit and read. Everywhere you go here, there's manga everywhere. And just if I might real quick to respond to the chat conversation we have regarding to Kishido-san. This is a very different conversation than we're having, right? When Kishido got himself in, or any of the guys that you guys talking about who basically stressed themselves out to almost the point of suicide, when they got into it, they followed the same format. They submitted, they got put in, they got popular, right? What you're talking about is something that happens on the back end, which is another conversation, and it is a problem, right? Because here in Japan, I don't think you understand the work ethic of the Japanese. They actually had to force companies to stop running 6 days a week because you had people that are working 12, 16 hours a day, and they were literally dying from overwork, literally dying from exhaustion. So the government had to step in. And these companies are, even though they've been forced to change, they haven't changed their idea because it's cultural. So you'll have these guys that are expected to put out every week, put out something, and they're working themselves to the bone 7 days a week to get it done. And you have situations like Kishido and other people as well that are just collapsing under full exhaustion and just, and of course what happens is because they're making money now, they want more, and more. So they keep pushing and pushing and pushing them, and these guys get pushed to a limit where they just basically collapse, literally, and it's done, right?
Yeah, and that's,
so it's a separate issue than what we're talking about, but I just wanted to address that.
That's another couple of things to do with the manga industry is that, first off, a lot of the books come out are weekly, and it's like 20 pages a week that you got to put out. Number two, they do pay for assistance, but it's usually background stuff and shading and the stuff that we consider like coloring or like not very important stuff.
They call it finishing, but
and you get I've heard it change now, but it was like $100 a page roughly that you would get. So what was that? $2,000 a week. So it's not
Yeah, well,
bad pay.
it depends. If you get into it, a single format, it goes way up. They can make some money, but they have no time to spend it. Is the problem.
Yeah, and that static pay does go up every like year or two or whatever based on your status and how
That's true.
popular you are.
Well, that's the thing is like when you get that level of success, you want to keep it going. But the thing is, well, what Chester was saying, that that's what fuels it, right? They get that opportunity in that magazine.
Yeah.
People start, liking it. It gets moved to the front of the magazine, and then eventually gets its own magazine, and then it keeps going. That is a pretty good. Also, that's a great way to find new talent, because then you can have your new talent wrapped in with your established talent until they, get their own series or however it spins off. So those books, those anthology type stories and books are pretty good for even grooming new talent.
Well, with new talent, what they do is there's usually competitions, like probably 2 or 3 times a year, with different themes around them, and you get pushed into the book and that's how a lot of people put out their first work. Is they have like a 60-page story, and then that gets rewritten when they go and submit it for a continuing series. So there's like there's one famous one that I know of, Kenichi, World's Strongest Kenichi, and he's like got this huge story. It plays the entire thing out, and then the next one it completely rewrites the entire story, but you can see the elements from the original. I think there's something with Dragon Ball that they have for that. There's a few famous ones out there.
Well, do you think that DC would ever be able to do or adapt that manga type business model? Would that ever be possible with a universe? Let me read this super chat before you guys answer, though. So we got D Geek Art. How are you? You are so kind for sending me the $5. So I appreciate it. The other thing with manga is that they are written with a finite end in mind.
It's true.
Some have longer runs, but not how Marvel and DC do their characters.
It's true.
Yeah, that's also a good point. Like, it's one of the things, even doing, the independent stuff that I'm doing right now, is I keep thinking, do I keep the run going like issue 1, issue 2, kind of like Marvel and DC do, or do I try to do more self-contained stories? And I've really come to the conclusion that for what I'm doing to do like prestige type of, creator owns, it's better to do one and dones, to keep it where you can make it a self-contained, not just campaign, but book itself. You can still visit stories. You can still go back to those IPs and do more stories, but they're just not forever ongoing, without any real conclusion, month to month to month, 12 issues a year, and so on and so forth. Yeah. It does get a little challenging, how do you keep something like that going? It's way easier if you do more one and dones, but
yeah. But you also answered your own question, though, Art, because in stating that obviously it seems they don't want to make money because if they were putting them in all the convenience stores, supermarkets, and stuff like they do here in Asia, and keep in mind Japan is the heart of it, but Koreans, Chinese, Thai, all the Asians read these things, right? I don't know what goes on in Europe, so I can't speak to that. But if in America they were putting the comic book books out everywhere, it would solve a lot of the problems, including the advertisement one, because it's there every time the kid walks by and says, "Mommy, Batman," right?
It becomes self-evident. Yeah, it's its own advertisement just by existing.
And to answer your question about could the Western market adapt the Asian market way of doing things? Yes, but we need some heavy modification to adapt to the not trying to kill yourself. model doing things.
Well, too
Well,
late, man.
that's
I've been
true.
doing this for 35 years, and only the strong survive.
True.
It won't come back without a return policy, by the way.
Yeah, the old
Yeah.
books did have a return policy. Do the Japanese books have a return policy?
No,
there's no need.
although they do have like weekly pickups here with the garbage, meaning you can take your trades and put them out on the on the stoop or out on the corner, and the garbage man will take it and recycle it. So they do have a recycling system, but as far as return policy, no. I mean, but then again, you're paying what, $10 for a phone book size thing every week?
Yeah, for like
I mean,
200, 300 pages.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
let
ridiculous.
me ask you: is there a collectible market though? Do they
Yeah.
collect these comics?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, absolutely. When they become successful, they put them into a smaller, a colored, artistic version of just one story, the book. Right. Let me give you a good example of another thing that they do. Something like Demon Slayer. Now, Demon Slayer is a brand new thing. Came out this year. Won all the anime awards. Right. Won a bunch of them. And that is something that is in house. Right. Now, they did that with a plan. They planned the manga, they planned the anime, and I'm sure there's a mobile app for it as well. So they do in-house things too. They do. It's not all submission, but with that kind of thing like that, that thing was immediately in what I guess what we would call a prestige format, where you're buying an individual book and it's just Demon Slayer. There's nothing else in. There's no Bleach. There's no One Piece or anything like that. It's just Demon Slayer. So they do have that, absolutely. Yeah.
And then with regards to what DeGeekArt was saying, well, there's the example of Dragon Ball. The original story was just that initial little arc where Goku gets found by Bulma, and he goes and they find the Dragon Balls for the first time, and that was all it was supposed to be.
Yeah, he was a kid.
Yeah, and that's like now they have like 50 years on top of that within the storyline. So you can have those arcs and plan just for a single story and then just do another arc. You just have to advance the story however you see fit, or change it as you need to, as you need to adapt the story. Because again, when they got even further, it's like, okay, we're going to do this. And they did another arc, and like, can I finish now? It's like, no, you got to keep on going. And they kept on happening over and over and over again. Eventually he got mad and he's like, wrote himself, tried to write horribly, and it finally canceled the series on him. But yeah, you can do that with manga. It's just not as easy, but it's probably better storytelling.
Yeah.
Well, there is controversy around Dragon Ball,
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to bring it back around, and I wanted to ask Zach and try to bring it back to the G5, whether it's going to happen or not. I guess that's up in the air. Whether DiDio was fired and then the initiative would go down with him, or if it's like Joe said, those things are months and months, done and planned in advance. So if that's the case, then what would they replace it with, in a quick fashion? But I want to ask and see what everybody thinks about just the idea, if it has merit at all, about aging up characters and possibly having some die off and then having new ones take their place. What do you think, Zach?
Yeah, no, I think that just because I could speak as you guys are all a generation ahead of me.
What are you saying? We're old?
No,
Yeah.
no.
I am.
All right,
Sonny.
you're the young lad.
Young man.
But
You're
it's just
the
like
young man
that would appeal
behind-
to me because I didn't get to grow up in this golden age of kind of comics in the way that you guys did. I grew up where Image was already established, and I was growing up with like my DC and Marvel was actually Image. I didn't like actually DC and Marvel that much. I only liked Batman because of a Frank Miller comic that I got when I was a kid. And that's what I grew up with. But most of my influence was from Image, so I'm like growing up on things like Witchblade and The Darkness and all their weird spin-off things like what was that one? Lady Mirage or Madame Mirage or something. But it's like I didn't have like this golden age of stuff, so it's like to think of them. But I did grow up on Batman Beyond, and that is the same sort of, I guess, 5G that is being implied, where it's like there's the older characters, but they're passing down to a newer generation, and so that does appeal if it's done properly, like we've talked about Chester. If it's done properly. So I think it could. I would pick it up to see where it's going, because I did not when they redid the New 52 and I saw it start just populating all of the shelves everywhere. I had no interest in it because I had no idea what was going on. I was like, New 52, what is this? I don't even know. I'm so far behind, and I don't understand why they're putting all this stuff together. And I picked up one, and it was only because it had art from Kenneth Rocafort. He did some work, and that was the only reason. That's the only reason I bought it, though, is because of his art. I didn't like it. The story was kind of really garbage. It was like a Red Hood story, and I was like, doesn't really matter because his art's cool, and that was the only reason why I bought it. So, go ahead.
Can I go next?
Yeah, go, Todd.
Todd.
All right, listen. I've never sat here and had a problem of going, oh wow, Batman's reached 80 years old, but he's still he is whatever age you write him, and you could jump around if you want or whatever, but you don't purposely age somebody and think that you can replace them, because all you'll have is a pale or derivative version of that character. So if you want a young character, there are young books and young characters, then read those. But this idea of aging somebody up, I don't know what you're looking for. Are you looking for that person to finally reach an age where he quits and retires and now he's the butler? Or are you looking for, because you age Bruce Wayne up and he gives up the Batman. Okay, you know what's going to happen next. Someone he taught or someone he teaches becomes the Batman. You still have a Batman, but you're going to have a different Batman. But it doesn't matter, because whatever story you put that guy in, you could do the same with Bruce Wayne. So if it's a good story, you're going to gravitate to it.
Yes, it's an obvious cash grab in just its inception, because I wanted to see what you guys thought first, but I'm going to tell you what I think. I agree with you wholeheartedly, Todd. I think that it doesn't make any sense from my standpoint. And also, Bruce Wayne is Bruce Wayne, right? Like, he is Batman. So as soon as you trivialize it and say that anybody can become Batman, then you diminish what Batman is. There's only one Batman, and it's Bruce Wayne. I'm sorry, you can't do it. There's only one Superman, and it's Clark Kent. You can't just go, oh, we're going to replace it with this guy, and we're going to try to be more contemporary. The thing is, the reason you don't do this, DC, and the reason this is doomed at its inception, is because you have timeless characters, and as soon as you start doing these stories, they are not timeless anymore.
Yeah.
You put an expiration date on these characters, and you force everybody to think in a way that is very limited as far as marketability and the stories you can tell.
And they devalue the legacy of those characters.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like something fresh didn't happen with like, for instance, with the Grayson book. The Grayson book was phenomenal, a great book. Now you took that away because you had to do the whole 52 thing, and now you're actually going back to that book. You're actually pushing that character. You've given him amnesia, so he doesn't ever remember being Dick Grayson or become.
Wait, again?
Yeah. He has amnesia, so now he's Rick. He's Rick Grayson. And now you're taking him out of his sort of tie to the Batman book and putting him in a sort of a unique costume. You know what you did? All you did is realize, well, Nightwing was never as popular as he was as Grayson, so we got to head back that way. It's stupid.
My hand is up, by the way, Art, just so you know.
Teacher, Chester has a question.
Yeah, I want to hear what all of you have to say. I don't know, for some reason, man. I feel like I just got to make a point. I just gotta boom, get in there. So what do you think, Chester?
Exhibit A, Frank Miller's Dark Knight. No. Now, why was that successful? Because basically you have an aged up Bruce Wayne teaching a successor, in this case, a female. And he's come back to solve a situation, right? Now, why was that successful? Because you took it out of the mainstream. It wasn't part of the mainstream. It was a elseworld type of thing, if we want to say like that. And I think this is what they need to do. What these companies, because as Todd had said, there's 80 years here, 80 years. Right. So what you should have is a classic imprint which covers all the characters, and there's still Batman books, there's still Superman, Spider-Man, whatever, set in their time, doing their things in the classic imprint. Then you have the modern one, which you're putting new things out, you're doing new things, and maybe Bruce Wayne is running around. Maybe he's running more of a boss of the corporation who rarely puts on his power armor to go out and deal with trouble. But if you separated things out like this, you still have the classic where people can go read Bruce Wayne and love Bruce Wayne in his setting when he was at his peak. But then you have something new that's being pushed forward, and it doesn't all have to be legacy. You have new characters, which is something that we have been begging for years and years and years. And we got some of this from DC with Damage and Sidestep, I think it was called, or whatever. And a lot of those things were pretty popular. And then they just killed it. Why? You had people who were excited about it. You got new characters. We were liking it. And then you just ripped it away. What are you doing? Right?
Because they did it. It was how they did it. You had, we're going to put John Romita Jr. on this book and this guy in that book and they were all there for no more than 3 or 4 issues.
Yeah, no, and that's another issue, another problem with it. But I'm saying this is what they should do. Because by doing this, you're keeping the classical things and you're not messing with them. You're allowing them to be what they are, which is timeless, right? And then you're creating a contemporary imprint, which allows you to try new things, push new things forward, right?
Right. And
I mean,
check this out, Chester. I'm sorry, but based on your idea and then the earlier idea where we were talking about like newsstand accessible books, that are inexpensive and that the mass market, has access to. Like there's only one Batman comic, there's only one Superman. So just think about, okay, you're a kid, Chester. I'm just using your idea. Okay, you're a kid and you've been buying this Batman comic off, at the local supermarket, right? You're good. Your parent buys you this book. So you're like, yeah, Batman's cool. And then you find out that in these specialty shops, there's these Elseworlds, and that they explore all these different facets to this Batman character and universe. And then you're like, holy crap, I want to see what that's all about. You know what I mean? But there's a distinct difference between the two. And there's also a distinct location to where you pick these books up. So then there is definitely, there's a tie, between the two. They're both published by DC and they're the same character, but they're not considered the same universe.
Yeah, no, and that would be fine marketing if they were bothering to do marketing, because I think we're at loggerheads with that, because I think you're right, dude. They don't want to advertise. They don't want to sell comics. It's what it feels like that. So, but I mean, I think this would be a smart thing to do. It allows new blood and new things to flow. I mean, what happened to Tales and what happened to What If and what happened to these things? Where are they? Right?
Yeah, I love those as a kid. Yeah.
Yeah.
One and done's like, what if Conan was in a contemporary setting? And then you see the shot of Conan in the middle of New York City, Times Square, and you're like, holy shit, what's going to happen? The guy's got an axe and there's a car coming at him. Like, what the heck's going to go on, right? And that's fun stuff, especially for a young kid. So, Joe Albino, what do you think about this this new G5 idea?
Well, I think it most likely started out as Dan DiDio, and to some degree, it might have been a little, it might have been a lot, Jim Lee, both understanding that once the whole DCU Rebirth initiative was effectively sandbagged, and they had lost a lot of sales as a result. And they had gained some new readers too, to be fair, but you could just look at the sales data and it's all there. They understood they had to do something to try to bring sales back up. I think 5G was supposed to be yet another event that was they thought would generate increased sales. I hear and read different takes on this actual significance of 5G long term. For a while there, I was hearing that it was going to be for the foreseeable future, and then over the last couple of weeks, I've been reading and listening to different people who say that when they talk with DC writers and editors, they're told it's not meant to be a long-term thing. It was just supposed to be something to reset the continuity, and then essentially it would be an event that started, lasted for a few months, and then ended, and then we would see what the DCU would look like afterward.
So they purposely wanted to lose customers?
You know,
That's what it sounds like.
for me, honestly, I think it comes back to, again, competing creative interests that are told from on high, hey, we've lost, X percentage of sales. We have to increase X percentage of sales. You guys need to come up with something big. And then I think you have competing creative interests that try to say, here's what's going to do it, whether that's the Bendis camp or the Scott Snyder camp, if we want to just use those guys as hypotheticals, because I think it's no secret that there's no love lost there. So you have these little tribes.
Never trusted German.
You have these little tribes within DC, and there's different creative ideas about what to do. If you don't have strong leadership and editorial to say, this is what we're doing, everybody, let's figure out how to get on the same page, then I think you have this idea where you've got, Leviathan is supposed to do this, and that event, Metal is supposed to do that, and well, we're not going to cooperate with what those guys are doing because we want our event to be successful. And I think it's just a constant tug of war at the editorial and writer level, and without a clear, defined leader setting the creative vision for the company, I just don't see how they're going to pull themselves out of this.
Right. What do you think of the idea of aging characters up, though? Like, you personally, how do you feel about, plopping down money and reading these stories?
Well, I personally wouldn't buy it. I wouldn't buy any of the books because I am a big fan of the Silver and Bronze Ages of comics, Marvel and DC. And personally, the Bronze Age is my favorite. I think that, to get even more specific, from the late 70s into the very early 90s, that's my favorite period of comic history, period.
That's the time I broke into the comic industry.
Ooh.
Hallelujah, brother.
That's exactly why it's my favorite.
But then you stopped
Check is
reading
in the mail,
them,
right,
no?
So now you guys know why I was brought onto this stream.
There you go.
No, but in all seriousness, from the late 70s into the very early 90s, both Marvel and DC, I mean, I used to have boxes and boxes of comics, and for me personally, that's my favorite era. And so I don't, like all of these reboots of universes and different versions of the characters, whether they're younger or older or whatever. I am a big believer that legacy is one of the things that I think you establish trust with readers, and then you do that with interesting characters and interesting stories and cool looking covers. Okay. And then you maintain trust with consistency. And if you maintain consistency long enough, it turns into legacy. And once you have legacy, then you've got multiple generations of customers. You've got grandparents with parents with grandkids, and they're all enjoying the same characters. They may be doing it at different stages of their lives. They may be doing it in a little bit different formats. The grandson might not be interested in the grandpa's Golden Age comics, but if they're all interested in the medium, that's the publisher honoring the legacy of the characters and rewarding the loyalty of the readers. Once you devalue that and you consider loyalty and legacy to be disposable, I think you're just shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, as you're talking, I was just thinking that this whole 5G idea is pretty dumb. Just in this context, it already exists. That dynamic already exists in the DC universe. There's already young characters that are being groomed to take over, the mantle. This dynamic already exists, the new and the old.
Yeah, New 52 screwed it up.
Long time. So I don't know how much difference this would be other than doing the unthinkable, which would be actually killing characters and have those other ones, taking their place. But they've also done stories similar to that in the past as well, when Batman broke his back or had his back broken and things like that, or when Superman died.
Yes, although I would argue that in both, and I think those are two good examples of quote-unquote DC universe shattering events, in a sense. But in both of those cases, I remember very distinctly that when Nightfall happened and Bane broke Batman over his knee, we didn't know exactly what was going to happen with Bruce Wayne and Batman, but we didn't, at least I didn't, and I remember working in a comic shop at the time, and the customers didn't think that Batman was going away. We thought there was some long-term story going on where Batman would be out of commission for a while, but everybody thought he was coming back. With Superman, it was a little different. I remember people being legitimately worried that Superman was actually dead. And the whole Reign of the Superman thing with the 4 potential replacements, I think that had a lot of interest for sure. But then my memory of it, and you tell me if you guys disagree, my memory of it, both for myself and in the shops, was that everybody was interested for a while, but then at some point we all thought, okay, this needs to go somewhere. Either Superman's coming back or one of these guys stays and the rest of them go. Mm-hmm. And then it seemed like people kind of started saying, maybe killing Superman wasn't such a great idea after all.
But this isn't always a bad idea, though, Buns. Miss Marvel, Lady Thor, Lady Hawkeye, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They can all die from butt cancer, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I would propose that those characters do not have the same level of popularity nor the same legacy as Batman or Superman.
Tell the bosses at Marvel that.
I'm sorry. The reason those worked, Joe and Chester, like the Superman dying and Batman, having his back broken, is because it wasn't telegraphed as an agenda. Like, that's the problem with some of these ideas too. We're going 5G. You already know what's going to happen. You've already said what the universe is going to happen. When Superman died, no one knew. They just picked up the book the next month, and it's like, what? Right. There was a lead up, epic storyline that led up to it and everything, but you didn't see it coming. You didn't know that he was going to die, and you didn't know Batman's back was going to get broken. They just did it, and then it has impact. But if you telegraph this stuff, like this is our next big crossover, then it's like, oh well, who's going to age out, who's not? Other than that, that's the only big idea that's there that would intrigue anybody. It's like, oh, who's going to make the cut? Who cares?
Yeah, and there's been such a heavy dose of cynicism that has settled in with longtime readers that I'm not sure if there is a way at this point for Marvel and DC to break through that. I don't know. I absolutely believe that in the indie scene there are characters and titles that are new and people are excited about. But in terms of with Marvel and DC, they've rebooted so many times and they have abused their characters and, in my opinion, the goodwill of their customers so many times. I'm just not sure if they can earn it back in a way that isn't just a short-term sales bump, but it produces sustained sales growth.
Yeah. I do have something that's a little off the 5G topic, but I'm curious. It's a bit of conspiracy theory. Curious what you guys think, because we were talking about why they don't sell in the convenience stores and supermarkets and things like that. I was kind of curious. Do you think it could be a tactic from the big two or big three to keep little indies out? Because there's no system in place for the indie guys to get into that kind of market. You have people like Peter Simeti and others who are trying to break into it, but there's nothing there. Whereas if the big two were doing that already, there would be a market to sell into, right? A wholesaler group that was distributing to convenience stores and supermarkets, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think there's any potential behind the fact that the big companies might not be doing that simply to keep the indies out and therefore cut down competition?
Well, I know that Diamond had when they basically just eradicated all other the competition like Capital and Heroes World and stuff like that. They actually had a mandate that the books had to sell a certain amount and that they had complete and utter decision making who would get in the magazine and who wouldn't. So it wasn't exactly like open to everybody. So if you were an indie creator and they just deemed that you weren't worthy to be in the magazine, then you wouldn't get into the catalog, pure and simple. Or if you were in the catalog but you didn't make them enough money, they would cut you from the catalog. So under that. Those guidelines, something like the Ninja, Turtles wouldn't have existed. You know what I mean? So yeah, there is some of that does go on and did go on. I don't know if it's from Marvel and DC though. It might be just Diamond that does that. Because they don't want to, go through all that work if they're not going to make X amount of dollars.
Sure.
Well, to your question, Chester, I know for a fact that with small publishers that Diamond has, I don't want to say that there's a concerted effort to keep the little guy down. I think it different people will have a different perspective on this. I will say, based on what I've been told, it's a valid perspective to think that Diamond is largely incompetent, especially when it comes to working with smaller publishers. I think it's also a valid perspective to think that there is some amount of collusion, and again, this is speculation, between Diamond and Marvel and DC, and that is based on many, many accounts of publishers and editors for these small indie companies. It was things like they put in a reorder or try to put in a reorder, and Diamond just says no. We're not going to distribute reordered books. Or a publisher has a run at the printer, and they go to Diamond, and then Diamond refuses to accept the shipment. I mean, I've heard 100 different kinds of these stories, and I've also heard stories about when stuff like that happens to Marvel or DC shipments, that someone at those publishers makes a phone call, someone at Diamond takes care of it.
Yeah, and of course I was that's one aspect of it, but I was also asking about where did the spinner racks go? Right, I'm also kind of putting that in the on the pile of conspiracy theory, because when you had the spinner racks and you had the magazine shelves, those companies would put up. You used to see all kind of weird stuff up there, right?
Mhm.
Not the DC spinner racks, but just the just the main shelves. You would see all kind of different weird things, right? And it just went away. It just went away.
Yeah,
there
there,
was like Harvey Toons, Atlas
Yeah.
comics.
Yeah.
There were all kinds of different publishers. Yeah, it wasn't just Marvel, DC.
That's
And
how
there-
I found She. Right.
there was a cascade effect of things that happened in the late 80s and into the 90s. It's a really convoluted web of one thing happening, and then it led to 3 other things happening and that sort of thing. But trying to make it as concise as I can, I know that there were some problems in the distribution models that had, well, Diamond had one, and then it had some competition. There was an Art, I'm sure remembers a couple of different distributors. Marvel ended up buying one of them.
Heroes World,
Heroes World, thank you. There was another one that went out of business,
Capital.
and was there one other?
There were a couple others, but I think those were the big ones.
Okay. So if Capital goes out of business and then Marvel buys Heroes World, all that's left is Diamond. And if all that's left is Diamond, and Diamond is wanting to work with comic shops instead of the newsstand, and there was a variety of reasons for that, then once it got to be where Diamond was the only real game in town, they could just say, we're not going to deal with newsstand distribution. We're only going to distribute to comic shops. And at the time,
it didn't even go down that way. Actually, the way it went down is that I believe it was DC. DC started pulling from newsstand and catering more to direct market. So if you guys, I don't know, I'm older, but if you guys remember, what DC did for a while is they would do like newsstand first, and then the second month they would go, oh wait, they went comic shop first, and then the next month or weeks later they did the newsstand. So they were actually kind of playing one up over the other, and putting more attention into the direct market and less into the newsstand, because how the old model was that if they were on the newsstand, the books became returnable. So if the books became returnable, it was hard to figure out income every month because you didn't know what it was going to be, because it would vary. And because they would have to credit, the retailers for whatever they didn't sell. So there was that. And also, like, as far as bookkeeping and royalties, Image Comics changed this. It doesn't seem like there were a lot of things that Image Comics changed, but one was that Image Comics started paying quickly. I think Marvel followed suit, but it used to take 3 months to get your 3 to 6 months to get your royalties from the book, because it took the publishers that long to figure out what the book sold, because they had to take in all the returns and everything like that, and it was a big cluster F of how they had to work this stuff out, what actually sold and what didn't, and then be able to give you your royalty based on that. So what started happening is, I think it was Image, but it might have started with Marvel towards the end. There is no, you know what? I think it was Image. I think it was Image. Image started paying you royalties the same month or the next month that after the book came out. Yeah, so it was a month after the book came out, you would get your royalty for that book. And so then you would get paid quicker. The guy would, whoever did the work would get their royalties on the back end quicker. And so then Marvel and DC had, started following suit. And I think that all those things led up to also just not using the newsstand. I mean, the newsstand was pretty much dead before Image Comics, but I think all those things were all working at the same time, where I believe the main reason the newsstand went away is because it was more it was more hassle for the companies than it was worth. And they figured they weren't making that much money off that stuff. And the sure bet was to sell the books directly to the retailer, like comic shops. And then they knew exactly how much money they made every month. So if they sold, 100 Batmans, then they knew that they were going to get paid for 100 Batman. So I think they, instead of gambling anymore, they wanted the sure thing. They wanted to know exactly what they were going to make every month and not have to worry about that, those returnable books.
And Art, I think Brian Hibbs also said that essentially that same thing. And I think you're right. But what I think that DC and Marvel, and also the comic shop owners, to be fair, some of them understood why this would be a problem, but a lot of them didn't, is that with newsstand distribution, that was essentially getting the books out in front of people.
It was advertising, yeah.
It was advertisement. Yeah, and if the publishers had treated it as advertisement and said, okay, this will be our loss leader at the newsstand, but that is what's going to funnel people to the comic shops where they're going to spend a lot more money. They'll spend a lot more money in a shop than they would at a spinner rack in a drugstore or at the shelf at the grocery store.
So what you're saying is the pencil necks got involved.
Yes.
Yeah, they wanted the sure thing. I think they just wanted the sure thing. And at the time, I believe this was the beginning of the end. I believe this was the tip of the iceberg that was showing. I think the comics industry made a bad decision to start placating comic shops more and more and more, the direct market. And like I said, I don't want to make it seem like I'm anti-comic book shops, because I'm not. But I do believe that they made a gamble, and that it didn't happen instantly. It took decades. But like you said, Joe, that is also advertising revenue. So even if it is operating at somewhat of a loss, I would just chalk it up to advertising. It's product. It's getting in front of people. It's letting them know that the damn thing even exists. Like, kids today might not even know that comic books exist, for goodness sake. I mean, how scary is that, to just sit here with the six of you and just come to the realization that there might be a generation that don't even know that comics exist. Even when I was a kid, my casual friends had a stack of comic books somewhere. Oh, yeah. They weren't obsessed like I was, but they had comic books in their house.
You know where I bought that black cover Death of Superman we were talking about earlier? I bought it. I went into a deli, just a little old deli, to buy myself one of those ice cream sandwiches, TM. Very delicious. They are very good, New England stuff. But I went in to get one of those, and I saw on the just sitting on the news on the rack with all the other magazines, they had a black cover Superman. I didn't know what it was about. It was just black cover with the red Superman in the middle. I was like, ooh, and I picked it up at a deli, a freaking deli, right?
And it changed your life.
Yeah, I saw my first comics on a spinner rack in a drugstore, and I saw my first digest style comic in the lobby of a dentist's office.
Almost everybody of our age group has exactly the same story. That all their entry level into comic books was not through a specialty shop, or through some kind of newsstand distribution, some kind of mainstream distribution. And I mean, the proof is there. Like, how much more do you need, as far as proof? But just to harken back, I don't think they want to make a profit. I don't think they really want that. I think they're fine with the way the system is working.
That's the sad point, though.
Either that, or they're really, really dumb.
I
think they're really, really dumb.
Do you really? In this context, Duragan, that's almost a better way of looking at it. You know what I mean? Because at least we can go, oh, well, maybe if you get some smarter people in there, we can fix it. But under what I really think is happening, it's all by design. So these aren't stupid people. These are people that are working within a certain confines, a certain restrictions, and are trying to make it work. And all along, somebody like DiDio, think about the higher ups knowing, if what we're saying is true, they're operating every day under those restrictions, like knowing that they're handcuffed. You know what I mean? That their parent company doesn't even give a hoot about them. So it really doesn't matter what they do, which leads me to possibly why we're in the Dan DiDio, 5G and all this other stuff. I think all those guys can do now is to try to justify their existence. You know what I mean? Because they know they can't change the cells, but all they do is try to go, well, we're an integral part of the brain trust. We're important because we come up with 5G ideas or new 52 ideas or, whatever the thing is, so that you can't fire us. So it's more of like a justification for their own existence than trying to make the industry better and stronger.
Yeah, you need us to come up with the next event that will carry us for the following 3 months.
Right.
Oh no, I think you're right in that there's a plan, but I also think they're really fucking stupid.
Boom, boom.
Like I said, I wish, I hope that you're right, man. Because
just look at the G5 timeline. Go to Generation 2, and Dick Grayson becomes Nightwing at age 18. We know that for a fact. Okay, and that takes place in Generation 2, year 15, according to this timeline. He becomes Robin in Generation 2, year 3. How old does that make him? It makes him 6 years old.
Yeah, very old. Yeah.
No, it makes him 6 years old when he becomes Robin.
Well, that's what I was saying early on.
So
it's
stupid.
The expiration date on everything. It makes you scrutinize all of this stuff, this universe, and all these characters in a way that they were never meant to. And the bigger thing is, these timeless characters they all now have an expiration date on them.
Superman gets married to Lois at 51.
Yeah, it's nutty.
The year in DC, according to the timeline, it ends at year 5 of G4. Dick Grayson would be 38. Robert Gordon would be 40. Bruce would be 60. Superman would be 66. Tim Drake would be 24. And it ends in the year 2002, not 2020.
Yeah. You read the caption here, not stupid, desperate.
But you see all that, like, I just was reading this, I'm like, well, that's completely just laid out, and I'm like, that, what? Like, how could you look at that and be like, that's right? Get away with that.
Check this out. Skid says, the fact that you're on Plan 5 shows that they had screwed up 1 through 4.
Right. But it is just to kind of finish my last thought on the the loss of the actual promotion and marketing of comic books. I mean, and I'm sure everyone has this, as you said, Art. But for me, I remember very clearly, and I was 5. It's not like you can keep a lot of 5-year-old memories, right? But I remember very clearly I was in a Cumberland Farms with my grandmother the first time I bought a comic book. She bought it for me, and it was Marvel Comics Group Daredevil, The Man Without Fear, number 126.
Ooh, yeah.
Right? But I'm just saying, I remember very clearly, and I was only 5. So, I mean, that's obviously stuck with me, right?
I had a teacher in the 2nd grade, and you know what she gave me? She gave me Daredevil 2. I still have it.
That's a good teacher.
Wow. That's a really nice teacher. That was in the 50s, guys. So
as we're kind of recounting the first time we encountered a comic, and how young we were, and it occurred to me that anybody whose first comic they saw in a comic shop, with a few exceptions, but for the most part, somebody would have had to walk them into that shop.
Yep.
Whether it was your dad or your mom or your older brother or your uncle or whoever it was, somebody would have had to walk you into that shop. And quite frankly, I didn't even know there were comic shops until I was probably 10 or 11 years old. and there weren't any near me, so I didn't get to go in one until I was about 16 or 17, and I could drive myself to one.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I discovered them later as well. So when I was really, really buying comics, and just devouring them, it was spinner racks at the local liquor store. And then when I
Liquor store art, you
Oh,
bad
I
boy.
used to go to the liquor store all the time, dude. I bought near beer and like a stack of comics and a Snickers bar. I remember we used to walk down the street with a near beer. We were hoping to get, pulled over by the cops like we were big shots, reading our Adventures of Superman comics.
Yeah, I didn't walk into a comic store until like 2009, 2010. So
I have to back up. You guys know what near beer is?
Yes.
Yeah.
I
That
even
was
know
actually the brand name. It was called Near Beer.
yep. And Art, we were talking. I don't remember if it was a couple days ago, if it was last week, but we were talking on a previous stream about the importance of trying to, for us in the indie scene, because if Marvel and DC are not going to wake themselves up and do something effective to capture the interest of kids, because they've already lost at least one generation, and some people argue they've lost 2 generations of potential readers.
Yeah.
Then it's got to be some positive disruptor from the indie scene that is going to come along and essentially, in my opinion, replicate the comic book shop experience, but do it through the internet and with digital formats, or incorporating digital formats, doing something where if a kid who doesn't have a comic shop near them can get some approximation of the exposure to comics and the experience of the camaraderie and the feeling of fun as you're trying to hunt for this issue or that storyline or whatever, but do it in a way that incorporates modern technology.
Yeah.
We have to capture new readers. We have to do it.
Well,
Yeah,
let's ask the
I think
millennial.
that's why it's so exciting right now is that the sky is the limit, and that this indie resurgence or this indie kind of thing that's happening right now could possibly spearhead that. And at the very least, I saw somebody in the chat that said their first comic book ever was Cyberfrog. So, there are still entry-level people that are finding these chats and, purchasing these books. So it can happen. Oh, what were you going to say, Chester?
No, I was just, let's ask the millennial where he found his first comic book.
Yeah, Zach.
Believe it or not, I actually found my first comic in a grocery store.
Really?
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, no, it was because I lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we had a thing called Smith's, and they would have they still have a bunch of magazines. Like, it was in that magazine section next to the cashiers that you now see tabloids and stuff. And
That's interesting.
Yeah, they had I think it was a Star Wars comic about Yoda.
Do you know if it was Marvel or Dark Horse?
It was probably Dark Horse.
Okay.
Because it's Star Wars. And that was like the first time my mom got me a comic, and I was like in love with the art. And I was
How
like,
old
wow.
were you?
Oh, I must have been like 7.
Oh, wow. So,
was-
wow.
See,
That's
I
interesting.
I think all of us on the panel, our first comic, we were in single digits. We were younger than 10 years old.
Yeah.
And it made such a huge impression on us that it's stuck with us for decades.
It's never gone away. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of strange just because I have a few nieces, and one of them's 10. And the first time she's ever seen a comic was when she came over, and I had all my comics out and displayed, and she was asking me what I did for a living. I say, I draw comics and I do this stuff. And she had no idea what I was talking about until I showed her. And she was like, what is this?
Wow.
What is this? You know?
You're depressing me, young lad.
Hey, at least I exposed a kid to something great.
True.
And
Yeah,
now she's
exactly.
interested.
Yeah,
Also
they don't know what comics are. It's an abstract. Can you imagine? They're watching these Marvel movies, and then somebody, off the cuff says, "Oh, yeah, I had a Captain America comic when I was a kid," and that kid just going, "A comic? What is that?"
Dude,
Yeah.
Could you highlight tinfoil oracle there, please?
It's those things that guy in Simpsons sells.
Look at that.
You have no idea anymore.
What a statement. I
There
mean,
you go,
it's
man.
yeah, good on Zach, man.
Mhm.
There you go. Yeah, I hear the story a lot, and somebody just the other day was like, I bought Black and White, first comic I've ever bought, and me and my boy, I guess his kid's around 7, love it, and he said that because it came with patches and stuff, and he was
Yeah.
like, I'm sewing the patches on his jacket and his backpack and stuff. You guys, this should not be taken lightly, man. What we're doing right now is having effect on people in a good way. So
I read that, by the way. I finally got to it in the stack and read your Black and White, dude.
oh, what do you think? Please say nice things.
No, I liked it a lot. I liked it a lot, actually. It's got great killer art, which we all expect. But the writing is really solid. And you did that with Tag, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to get her in on the second volume, but it's looking less and less like that's going to happen. But
Oh, really? That's too bad.
Yeah.
I liked it a lot. We had DeWolf in here, and he had one section he was critiquing in a little bit. I think I see what he was talking about, but overall, I thought it was excellent, dude. And that's saying a lot. I mean, I've bought well over 40 of these indie books that have been coming out the past year or two, and a lot of them have really good art, but the stories are meh, right? So I say you're doing well, man.
thanks. Yeah, it was definitely like we were trying to capture, like, keep that 90s feel, which obviously it's from the 90s, but just like a Big Trouble in Little China, and that that sensibility, just kind of a fun action adventure. Because I do think that there's one thing that comics can do, and they can bring those kind of cornier aspects to life. Like, we don't have to worry about the restrictions of reality. So some of these ideas we can get pretty far out with them. We can get pretty crazy with the ideas that these movies, that's why they have to change so much of it, because it just doesn't really translate into a real world scenario. But in comic books, man, this stuff can exist. You know what I mean? We don't have to justify it. We can dream it. We can go, we can go big. We can get nutty with stuff. And so Black and White really is just a celebration of just having fun with a comic book and not getting bogged down with continuity and all this crazy stuff. And Chrono Mechanics, I've learned since the Black and White, because that's 2 issues. Chrono is a 60-page self-contained, so you know what I mean. Like, you can read that and that's it. Just enjoy it and move on to the next book, next Chrono book. But you don't have to buy, the next one to find out the ending or anything like that. So thanks, you guys. I do appreciate it. Yeah.
Adrian T 2099 says comics is too realistic nowadays.
I
kind
agree.
of agree.
Mhm.
I agree. And we've talked about it in Pontificators. You guys don't know how much this really means to me, coming here, hanging out with this panel and hanging out with the chat, because this is like therapy time. Because I really do think these comic book ideas they don't hold up in any realistic way. We've talked about it. Like, most of these books that we're talking about are really designed for younger kids. Batman, just the name alone, is only going to appeal to a younger person. Spider-Man, who in their 20s and 30s for the first time is necessarily going to pick one of those up, unless they fell in love with the creator on YouTube, like the stuff we're doing now, or were turned on to it from a friend or something like that. But these things are really meant to come in as a child, buy them, fall in love with them. We all have that same background. Even the young boy Zach Bradley, has that as his backstory. Reading a comic when you were young and then just falling in love with the art form.
Yeah, and reading the comics nowadays, there's no whimsy to them. That's what I like mostly about manga. Is there's a lot of whimsy in there and like the basic idea and concepts.
True. Thank God Stan Lee changed his mind from Flyman to Spider-Man, though. God.
One of the things that I have told Art is that the superhero universe I'm developing for my publishing company is very much inspired by Bronze Age Marvel and DC storytelling. And there's going to be, bright colors. There's going to be whimsy. It's definitely going to be geared toward all ages, not a dumbed down 5-year-old book or anything like that, but truly an all ages mindset is going into the publishing, which is what I think comics used to be, and what really I think is what they need to be if we're going to get readers at age 8 and keep them, to age 88.
Yeah, they can be fun and still smart. Like fun and whimsical and crazy doesn't mean they have to be dumb.
Right.
They just have to be fun. And I think when you scrutinize these ideas too much, like most of this conversation and this G5 is, then these ideas start to fall apart. They don't really hold up in any kind of realistic, scrutiny, under any kind of realistic scrutiny, I should say. And I believe that that's fundamentally the problem, that they're trying to age up these comic books, but the concept themselves doesn't really lend it to that. You know what I mean? You can write adult comic books. Those can exist. But I think like the Marvel and DC universe, for the most part, don't really fit into that because they're big, bombastic, fun, childish ideas. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Gamma radiation.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome.
The point of escapist entertainment is to give you a venue to escape from reality and be entertained.
I thought it was to educate you on how to be a proper human.
Well, it's to do that too, but
I missed that meeting. Yeah,
it's okay if you're transgendered or whatever. Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
I mean, it is okay, but I don't want to see it in my comic. Or if it is like a side character, I don't want them to change Iron Man into a, Tony Stark is now transgendered. Oh,
that would be wonderful. Riri Williams in the house. Joe, are you taking submissions and stuff like that for your production company?
Eventually, yes. For now, it's still early days. I spent a long time, about a year and a half, both in creative development, building out the universe, but also researching the publishing landscape and figuring out the ins and outs of that, learning who would be good to know and who would be good to stay away from, and so on and so forth. So I'm at the point now where I'm taking care of some legal stuff, getting trademarks approved and that sort of thing. And in the next month or two, I expect to be launching a YouTube channel, launching on various social media platforms with logos and promotional art and that sort of a thing. I just have to wait for the trademarks to go through, and then I'll be able to, go public with all of the cool looking stuff. But initially, the plan is to introduce the superhero universe in a series of crowdfunded books. Assuming the first one is successful, the goal is to essentially introduce the universe in a 12-part story, 3 volumes. Each volume would be essentially have 4 comic book issues worth of content. So let's say a 96-page book for volume 1. Mm-hmm. And then if that's successful, I would do the same for volume 2, the same for volume 3, and then
just trust me, Chester, the stuff that Joe has in mind, he told me the other day over dinner, it's really epic. And
That's awesome.
yeah, I think we need to kind of start wrapping this up because
Yeah.
we're
Well, no, I just let me know, Joe, because I'm looking at writing a couple comics this year. So if
Oh, well,
you're
I'll
interested,
I'll just wrap it up by saying that once we actually get the first one out into the public, and if it's successful, then the whole universe is designed to allow other people to come in and and to work within the framework of that. So yeah, it's absolutely designed to be every bit as big as a Marvel or a DC universe.
Yeah,
Sweet.
it's an entire universe, man. It's going to be massive. And another thing, I'm Joe and I've been talking about is possibly trying to do some kind of weekly thing as well on YouTube to try to get his presence, up and
Mhm.
let you guys kind of know who Joe is and what the Thunder Buns is all about
Yeah.
and what he has, down the line planned. So I'm going to let everybody kind of plug their stuff at the end. I just kind of want to kind of start easing into an ending here because these things become epic. These pontificators. So we're on hour 3. So let's see what Mark has to say. Mark C, thank you so much for the $10 super chat. I find the more realistic the art gets, the more your creative toolbox gets limited. Yes. Back chrono mechanics, no limitation here. Things like foreshortening speed lines, sound effects don't work in a realistic comic book setting. Yes, indeed, you do. And it takes the fun out of it as well. But having said that, you can make serious comics. I just think that a lot of this stuff is too serious overall. Like we do need to get back to some of that more silly, good, clean fun kind of aspects to comic books. So thank you guys so much. So Durakan, do you have a parting shot? A pearl?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at Dragon, and I will be trying to launch a crowdfunder on Kickstarter in 2 weeks, hopefully. It has to get approved
Sweet,
first.
dude.
Oh, very
Called
cool.
FPS Agent, and it will also have 2 different stories, each 20 pages, and a mini story done by Flit Armorant called Sunbreaker.
Ah, very cool. How about you, Chester?
Well, first I'll speak for Todd Mulrooney. Sorry, guys, I fell asleep and my face hit the keyboard. Okay, so
Yeah, we did kind of lose Todd there.
we did, but no, I love doing the pontificators. It's a lot of fun. Come over here and chat and meet new people and talking to you guys. Of course, come over to Fanspeak at Chester Busby on YouTube and get involved with what we're doing. We have a lot of fun shows, and Joe, you should do that too. Yeah, come over and say hello to my community and introduce yourself.
Yeah, I've actually been a lurker for quite a while. I haven't been able to catch many shows in the last couple of months, but yeah, I've caught quite a few of them.
Oh, you
Oh,
do
sweet.
have a fan, Chester. He's just in the closet.
I got a lot of them. I got a lot of closeted fans, and that doesn't include Booster.
There's nothing wrong with the closet.
Come out of the closet.
Yeah, right. But yeah, no, come on over, and yeah, I'm loving it, dude.
Yeah, well,
wait. I suspect that Joe is a Morlock. He just might be.
So in the chat, I just put my Twitter handle if anybody wants to keep apprised of what's going on. Like I said, I'm still a little ways from going public, but I appreciate the invite, Chester. And when I'm ready to talk in more detail, I'd definitely be happy to come on and have some conversations.
Yeah, and in
Awesome.
the meantime, look forward to the Fart and Thunderbun show weekly, only on YouTube.
Go together like peas and carrots.
I guess I'm Fart and you're Thunderbuns. So I guess
there you go.
Perfect. I don't know. Is there a little lightning that comes out as well? Not to get too graphic.
Absolutely.
The thunder god from down under. Yes, and we have the young lad Zach Bradley. I see that you have a link here. Do you want to talk about your book and parting shot?
Yeah, for sure. Zach Bradley. You can find me on Twitter at Zach_DB. It's mostly where I hang out if you want to contact me. And right now I have my comic sign up early bird special type of thing going on that's going to be going live here very soon. And this is a relaunch to a project I already started. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get any last minute people who have actually approached me and said like, hey, I totally missed. I didn't even know you were doing stuff. I totally missed this project the first time. How can I get this before you print? And so I'm giving people a chance to
Wait, slow down on the artwork. I'm sorry. Like, show us the first image and then set that one right there and stay on there and keep talking and then slowly go to the next one.
Okay.
I don't want to miss it. This is good stuff.
It's great art.
Yeah. People just were wondering how do they get a hold of this. So I'm doing a second campaign to get in any last minute people before I go to print. So that's what this is.
Can you click on the smaller images? Will they make?
Unfortunately, the way they set it up is like very nothing.
And
Well, that looks
thank
very
your wife
good,
for letting you out of the house, by the way, young man. So,
What? What are you talking about?
huh? What?
What?
Huh? What?
Weirdo. You're such a weirdo. But yeah, this looks like something you'd be interested in. It's a fantasy-based comic, world-ending, world-building, lots of whimsy, plenty of laughs, plenty of sadness. It's got a bunch of things in it. So
Are there speed lines?
Oh, there's definitely speed lines.
Well, there's some speed lines.
There's definitely some speed
Where
lines.
are the boobs?
Oh, there's
That's what
definitely some
everybody says. They're right there. Look at that. Chick with
No,
the-
check it out.
oh,
Check
look
it
at
out.
that.
Yeah.
All right. Ooh.
Yeah, and this is actually a print that's done by our very own Siege that'll be offered in there. And I also have a Weldon, of course.
Of course, gotta have a Weldon.
I have a Weldon.
Everyone needs a Weldon.
So, and then I gotta color up a Brad Ashworth too. So
Hey, Brad.
Never have your steak well done. No.
Wow. Damn. All right. And by the way, mentioning Brad Ashworth, of course, Pencil for Life, all your well wishes, please. You know, he is having some troubles. So, positive thoughts for our brother Brad, please.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. All right, man. So
yeah, that's it.
we got that from the young lad, Zach Bradley. That looks very impressive, man. So you guys have a lot of these projects to look forward to. It's going to be, it's just going to be an amazing year, man. There's so much stuff to look forward to. There's so many cool books, and we got a couple. We got some backers today. So I wanted to thank everybody for supporting Chrono Mechanics. And if you haven't yet, please do so. Go check out the site and pick yourself up a book. We also have the variant cover tier, which I'm really for the last couple of days I've been talking quite a bit on social media about, and it's done by 4 major industry pros. We have Tom Bancroft, we have Aaron Lopresti, we have Carlo Barberi, who my super son's brother, and we have who else do we have? We have Sean Cheeks Galloway. So we have some major talent there. So come by, check out the site, and pick up the variant cover tier. And I think that's it. So I want to thank everybody for coming by, hanging out in the chat there, and thanks to all my pontificator buds for coming in and giving us such good insight on this wild, wacky industry that we know so well and love so much. You guys have a good evening.
Later.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah, take care, guys. See ya.